All right, so we should be live here. It doesn't tell me that we're live yet, but it always goes live before it tells me we're live. So I'm just gonna.
Sam, I've got the YouTube or the live stream up in another window, so I'm not seeing it yet, but it should be coming.
There we go. I got it.
Yeah, it's
I
always
had to refresh it, but
it's always about 10 to 15 seconds behind. So. All right. No feedback.
There might be some math involved, Steve. If there is, we'll try to keep it elementary level for the week's sake.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I operate on that math where that meme with what's her name's on there and she's looking confused and there's all the symbols and the.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. The champ is here. Yeah, that would be James.
Yep. What's up?
Okay. Puppies came running down and it terrified me for the sake of my camera. So, all right. We will we will give a minute for everybody to kind of slowly filter in here. This is Riley that you see on the screen here.
Hello, hello.
Hopefully, yeah, and everybody can hear everybody, and this is pretty cool. Well, in bowling, you really need to. I mean, you should be able to count to 300, but there are 10 frames, so.
Yeah.
So, and the computer takes care of the bowling math. So. All right. Once again, I am my beverage of choice. I forgot to say. Well, you've seen the streams. You know that there's always a beverage of choice. Synergy Raw Kombucha Raspberry Chia for those of you who like to chew your drinks. So, it's one of the favorites of mine. So, this is Riley Patton. Riley, you're from McPherson?
Correct.
Okay, so you're actually from McPherson. You just don't,
well,
or
currently living there from Wichita.
Okay. Okie doke. And then, of course, we have James Kniffen Jr. Slash Shimwrecker Enterprises that's here that you normally see in the chat.
Yep, making a return to video form today.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was, I think your last live stream, I was busy bowling a tournament down in Rock Hill, South Carolina.
Yeah, so busy making money.
Wasn't able to make it for that. Yes, yeah. Busy making quite a bit of money, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Finishing third in a field of 84 and winning 28 of 40 bracket finals is a pretty good day.
Yeah, that's pretty okay. So.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll probably go on ahead and get started here, especially for those of you who will be watching this later in video form, so you don't have to skip the first 10 minutes or so. So the three of us all bowled a tournament in Kansas City a couple weekends ago now. Riley is somewhat local. It's about a 3.5 hour drive, 3.5
ish. Pretty much.
Yeah, from McPherson to Kansas City. And then James had to ride a bird in from...
Yeah, 2-hour plane flight. Takes a little bit longer distance.
Yeah, Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of tournaments, and the interesting thing about these tournaments is that day one was on the Earl Anthony pattern, which is 30 mils, 43 feet, so pretty heavy volume. Anytime you're approaching 30 or going beyond 30, that's heavy volume-wise. And then 43 is on the long side of medium. I wouldn't quite call that long, but it's not really medium either. So what you would imagine your typical singles and doubles shot at nationals to be. However, the lane surfaces in Kansas City are notoriously high friction. Not just high friction, they're super high friction. And with Riley and myself being local, we can kind of bring as many balls as we want to. Riley's bowled a lot of tournaments in Kansas City. I bowled a lot of tournaments in Kansas City, so we're quite a bit more familiar with the lane surfaces than James is. And compound, in addition to the fact that, he's traveling and pretty well limited to 6 bowling balls, or more easily limited to 6 bowling balls. The extra 2 would have been probably
$50 each way.
Yeah. So probably
it was a tough kind of when I'm traveling for something like this or like USBC nationals. Really, my approach, my mentality is I'm trying to just build a really good generalist type of arsenal that's going to get me close on pretty much anything. And then once I'm actually on the ground and bowling, just figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
Because I could try to specialize and, gamble that I won't need, snow tire, and I'll need to, bring another shiny ball or something like that. But then, that's kind of the way I see it, is the way I've always looked at it, or the way I've been looking at it for the past year and a half now, is I built that core arsenal for a reason. And unless I have a really good reason not to, then just kind of stick to that plan.
Yeah. Please, Greg Atwater, please don't talk about this tournament. Trust me, I don't want to talk about the tournament.
I don't want to talk about my first 5 games on Saturday.
That's why I have these other 2 people to talk about the tournament, because...
Did Saturday even happen? I only remember
Greek
Sunday.
Tragedy.
Yeah, fair point.
So anyway, the second day, which was a doubles tournament, was the house shot, which even though they did an extra head pass, it started off pretty crispy, and day 1 was 6 games of singles, but there was 4 to a lane. It was a packed house, 24 lane house, 4 bowlers per lane, and then is the same thing again for the doubles tournament. There were 48 teams, and so 4 people per lane on a much drier house shot for 8 games instead. So very, very big theoretical on paper difference between what was going on Saturday and what was going on Sunday. But again, when people take a look at the pattern graph and say, oh my God, 30 mils, 43 feet, Riley, you're thinking, what motive balls are you thinking? Like
Alpha Jackal, Forge Fire,
yeah.
Forge if you have that one. I don't have that one because I still have a Covert Revolt and Revolt Havoc. So
yeah, so you're thinking all the big stuff. As far as James and I are concerned, we're thinking UFO, Phase 2, Axiom, the big stuff.
Yeah, so my obviously I was limited to the same 6 for both days.
Yeah.
So I brought pretty much what is my default travel setup right now, which the one change that I made, and in retrospect I wish I hadn't, but that was just kind of a gamble, was my big snow tire was a short pin UFO that I drilled the week before I flew out.
Yeah.
So it was like 2 1/4 pin to pap and mass below the thumb. So very strong, very early, very rolly. Ended up not needing that at all, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Other 5 were a 5-inch pin Axiom, a 4-inch pin IQ Tour Solid, a 4.5-inch Daredevil, a 5-inch Recom, and then my plastic ball, which my plastic ball hooked too much on Sunday, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Well, that's what actually makes it interesting, because for something like this, you're thinking, well, there's a number of different things I can probably get to work on a house shot. But some of the more important ball choices were probably going to be for the sport pattern on Saturday, or at least that's what, if I had been traveling, that's the same way I'd have been thinking. It's like, well, I can get any number of balls to work on a house shot, but I want to make sure that I have a couple balls in there specifically, or probably give more thought or more care to the sport pattern on Saturday.
Yeah, which is exactly why I took that short pin UFO. Is every time I'd seen the Earl Anthony pattern, it was always like a ton of volume in the front part of the lane. You really needed something to be able to pick up and slow down without hydroplaning.
Yeah,
and I thought that would really come into play, and that didn't work very well.
Yeah, because because
lane surface and topography.
Yeah, because as soon as we got started, game 1, I look a couple pairs to the left and see Brad Miller throwing an all road. And it's
from 4th arrow.
Yeah, from 4th arrow. And it's one of those things where, given my familiarity with the lane surface, it's not terribly surprising. But when you see a PBA Touring Pro start with a super high RG, semi-weakish, I mean, it's got NRG hybrid on it, so the cover's not terribly weak. But at the same time, you're on a super high volume, medium long pattern, and one of the best out there is hooking the lane with a high road line ball. and that's where things kind of go out the window. So that's where we're gonna start with as far as the equipment that we brought and what we saw out of that equipment, why we instantly stopped using that equipment, and what actually ended up happening. So Riley, let's kick it on over to you first, and throughout practice and what you saw and the decisions that you made to kind of start the tournament off on Saturday.
Let me pull up my bowling app similar to PinPal. I was previously using PinPal and found another one that I liked. Let me see. It was the Tour of KC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's what that one was?
June 6th, I think.
Yeah.
Saturday.
So I started with, I brought an Alpha Jackal, a Covert Revolt, a Trident Nemesis, a Venom Shock, and a Supra, and I was almost 100%, or no. Alpha Jackal, Covert Revolt, Trident Nemesis, Venom Shock.
Yeah, you got that right.
I feel
Supra
like I'm
in your
forgetting
spare
one. Yeah, and a spare ball.
Did you bring the Royal?
One.
Did you bring the Royal, or was that not there?
No, I didn't bring that one.
Okay.
I don't know, but I started out in practice with the Alpha Jackal, playing for me what I would consider to be fairly far right, which is about second arrow at the arrows, and then getting it out to about 4 or 5 at 40, 41, 42 feet. And the Alpha was just slowly walking its way back, which was the starting goal. And then I fell into the trap that I often do when I bowl league, which is where, well, I'm just striking from this line, I'm just going to throw it here and then just continually move left as the days go on. And of course, when bowling on a pattern like this one, where it's, like you say, 43 feet, 30 mils, 2-to-1 ratio, that's not the best way to attack it. You want to have other avenues. So I was lost from the beginning, but that's probably one of the tougher patterns I had bowled on in a long time.
And I would think especially because of the lane surface factor in there too, which really throws a wrench into some things when you think that you're going to go in and see oil, and then all of a sudden the ball starts doing some weird things, and then it starts doing the skid hook skid thing, and then all of a sudden you're not just making small moves, you're making big moves, and everybody's shelling down more than, I think that there was plenty of big cores there, no matter, I mean, aside from an all road, but there was plenty of people still using bigger cord stuff, but I started to see people shell down really quickly. So, James, let's pass it over to you, and what'd you see out of your UFO, and how quick did that go back in the bag?
I think it lasted about 5 shots. It was, I mean, to explain the theory behind that ball, it's the most hooking ball from Storm Roto ever right now, and it's not really that close. It creates more positive traction than anything else in the line, but while doing so, it also can create a lot of shape down lane for how much traction it creates. It reminds me of the Sherlock from a few years back in that regard. So this, having that short pin UFO, I think I literally had 2 games on it. So it's still essentially a dead fresh cover. So it was just, I saw very quickly that it was just digging in and chewing like before it got to 30 feet.
Yeah.
And it was just using up so much energy that it had nothing down lane. And if I got it up the lane, missed in a little bit, it would just break loose and hook like crazy. And if I'd missed just a little bit right, I would just bog down and do nothing and punch out the 3-pin.
Yeah.
So that told me very, very quickly it was way too much cover, probably too much core as well. And so then I think I spent the rest of practice, what did I do? I think I threw my Axiom for like the last 8 or 9 shots of practice, trying to find something and like hit the pocket at least. Because I think I was seeing more early friction than I realized in practice, even with the Axiom. And so I ended up touching my Axiom with a 2000 pad at the end of practice just to try and get it to slow down, which ended up making it actually slow down too much. And so then, you mentioned how there was that trend of kind of shelling down very fast, but still staying in bigger cores.
Yeah.
And I think if I had left my Axiom, it was a like 3000 with about 5 or 6 games of lane shot on it when I walked in the building.
Yeah.
So I think if I'd left it at that surface, my first game and a half would have been a little bit better. Looking at my pen pal right now, I think I got out of it by like the third or fourth frame of game 2, but I ended up I started between second and third arrow and got almost all the way to fourth arrow by the end of game 1.
Yeah.
Because of how much early friction I was seeing, trying to play in the track area, and so I was just trying to get away from that, get away from all that hang when I missed right, and hopefully just find some semblance of ball reaction. It didn't work well. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 open frames for a 140 my first game.
Yeah.
So that went really great. I should also add, this was my first tournament back post quarantine.
Oh yeah.
So it's for the first. Yeah, I'd gotten in 2 or 3 solid practice sessions, but even with that, I was still super rusty physically, and I admittedly was not throwing it that well until probably game 4 or 5. So, yes, my ball reaction was not there. My ball reaction was terrible, but especially on harder patterns like this, if you're not executing right behind the foul line, then it's tough. And it was a combination of those that really crippled me early on.
Speaking of not executing right behind the foul line, we'll talk about my Saturday.
I wasn't going to say that.
No, that was a perfect segue, actually. Man.
So I guess I don't even remember what your sequencing was.
It was a train wreck. So,
Wow.
So anyway, I had
that notwithstanding.
Yeah, the weekend before, right when the whole bowling thing started back up again, and I was determined to rid myself of the wing. I practiced for a couple hours the previous Sunday, and by the time I was done practicing, I felt halfway decent. It still felt really awkward and kind of upside down, and I failed to consider that when I was out practicing, the lanes had already been bowled on, and so they were kind of beaten up, and I was fading like 4th or 5th arrow with that Marvel Max SE, and that's kind of my wheelhouse anyway, so no shocker that ended up going well. So I was still kind of determined to do that on Saturday, and I didn't really put a whole lot of money or action in. I just wanted to use it more as a glorified practice session and just kind of get a feeler for some things, and especially with how different the pattern was. I knew that I could fly out of it when I had plenty of friction, but what am I going to do? Can I still roll the ball? What exactly are my limitations here? And I shot 120 the first game, so I explained that rather quickly. I did have a game in there too where I went spare, gutter spare, like 7 spare, and then 3 spare. So that was a great.
That was impressive. Greg Atwater also just mentioned in the chat that it was 110 degrees inside both days.
Oh
so
yeah. It was a little warm when we walked in there on Saturday to begin with, and I'm looking at 100 people in there, and I'm like, oh balls, this is gonna be great.
Yeah, it was definitely a little toasty in there for sure.
So I brought a Crux Prime. I brought my trusty Halo Burn Phase 2. I did not have an Axiom. I brought the Marvel Max SE, and I don't believe I brought the Crux Prime in case I was going to be able to play straight, but having probably put a little bit too much stock in the lane friction, or actually, no, that's probably about right. I had no idea how I was going to be able to throw the ball, and it was kind of a travesty all day, but I think very quickly we did the same thing because there was so much wiggle on the outside, and when you pair that with the fact that the ball started skidding before the end of practice, and so you've got to find a way to either get through that, get around it. And so why Brad Miller ended up at 4th arrow with the all-road is because everybody started trying to get away from the wiggle on the outside of the lane first, and then they figured out that everything was hooking a lot more than they thought it was going to hook. At least the ones who are able to read things like that. There was still plenty of people that was trying to fire it in from the outside, and some people just attribute that to, oh man, it's a really tough pattern, instead of watching very closely your ball reaction all the way down the lane and seeing that if you lay it down just a little bit left, it's not just overhooking, it's starting up way too soon. That's a clue that you need to move left and try to find some more head oil or try to find some more angle to help you out. And then if you get one a little bit right, is it burning up or is it just not hooking back? And that can be something that's kind of tricky to read sometimes, the difference between something burning up and not actually hooking. But the little jump, if you can see a little jump most of the time, 30, 35 feet, something like that. It'll jump just a little bit, and that's kind of more your where it burns just a little bit of energy, and that's more my clue anyway that something's actually burning up instead of just not hooking. If you see something start to kind of wind up and then push some more, that's kind of a visual clue for me. If something doesn't get back, it just continues to spin and spin and never kind of does anything. It's just late. But I was kind of a travesty all day long, and I don't think I ever shot anything halfway decent, never had any kind of a look. It was, and I kind of went through everything. I went to the Phase 2 and used that for most of the day, and then when nothing was going right, I used my Marvel Max SE, which is NRG Smooth Pearl, just because I wanted to. It was one of those things where nothing else is working, and I'm throwing it awful, so I'm just going to throw the pretty ball. So
Which actually wasn't a bad idea, honestly, from a reaction perspective.
Oh, and it really wasn't. And that's the thing that I keep harping on about. I keep talking about shiny NRG Pearl, and the Halo Burn showed its merits the second day, about halfway through when I finally showed up for a few minutes anyway.
Whoopsie. Yeah, kind of looping back to what you were saying a minute ago about when the middle of the lane is pretty flat and you have a lot of hang to the right. Usually kind of my clue for that is like when I'm in practice, I'm actually not trying to throw two shots exactly the same.
Yeah.
Even if I'm putting my feet in the same spot, I'll try to play a line, but I'm almost semi-intentionally not being super precise because I want to test my limits a little bit.
Yeah.
And so if I get one up the lane a little bit and it breaks loose, then if I get one too right and it doesn't even touch the head pin, then and knowing the pattern that we're on coming in, regardless of whether it's fresh or burn, that's usually a clue that I'm not far enough inside.
Yeah.
Because if it's on the fresh, that means that I need to move left to get away from that hang spot so that I can create some hold for myself, get the ball started hooking before it ever gets to that hang and kind of neutralize it that way. And if that happens on the burn, then that means I'm actually outside of where all the friction is. So like, the kind of trough that guys build in the lane over the course of a block on patterns like this. And so if I'm on the right side of the trough, especially if my rev rate, that's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So then that means, okay, time to jump 10 left, throw it slower, knock the holes out of it, and it'll probably come back.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Yeah. What's that?
Sorry, I was just going to say that was the story of Game 6 for me, but we'll get to that later.
Okay. That's one thing that unless you just that's another thing that's kind of important too. Unless you just flat throw the ball out the window, pay attention to what it's doing. Even if you let it go and it's not that great of a shot, pay attention and see. You might have one of those accidental, oops, I kind of threw it 3 or 4 boards right, and oh wait, it hooked. That's information, all that stuff that you need to be paying attention to. So after we got into it, Riley, what were you seeing? What did you end up throwing for the first few games, or when did you think that you figured it out?
Well, I started out with the Alpha Jackal and used that into the 9th frame of the first game, it looks like, and I switched to my Covert Revolt. And in the 8th frame of that first game, I had 113. So it was going fantastic for me.
Yeah.
So I switched to Covert Revolt. That lasted all of a frame because it looked equally as bad. And then switched to the Trident. And that one I 6-spared 9. And then the next game was my best game of the day at 194. And it looked like I threw the Nemesis the whole day. Or that whole game. So, like I said, I didn't try out pretty much more than 1 or 2 balls in practice, and that's just my inexperience with doing these tough pattern tournaments. Most of the time, these Kansas City Tour tournaments are not like PBA patterns. They're most of the time like 7 or 6-1.
Yeah, the challenge
modified
patterns.
House.
Yeah,
sort of stuff like that, where it's anywhere from 39 to 42, 43 feet. So I was actually excited to get on this really tough pattern and see what it was like for the pros that go out there and do it all the time. And after that day, I was like, man, people do this to make a living? Like, this seems like the least effective way to make money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. I was like, yeah, that sounds about right.
So I did not do well on Saturday. Looks like the third game I had switched to a Venom Shock, and that was when we were down on the end pair.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
That's right,
remember-
because 24 hooked out the window, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 5 or 6 more than 23, if I remember right.
yeah,
Or was
yeah.
it?
Frame 8 of that third game, I had switched to the Venom Shock and struck out that game for 186.
Mm-hmm.
Next game, I had stayed with the Shock the whole time for 181. Game 5 was another travesty at 122.
Mm-hmm.
Throwing the Shock. Threw the Supra a couple frames in there, it looks like. I'm not sure exactly why. Probably never moved. And then switched to the Covert Revolt when I was totally just done for the day.
Yeah.
And had probably the best look from 5th or 6th arrow with the Covert Revolt just hooking and dying in front of the pocket.
Yeah.
So
There's a pretty good question in here. Greg says, should have saved myself $70 in 6 hours, just walked into the bowling center, hand my money to Brad Miller, and get back in my car. That kind of segues into the next question here. I'm curious, do any of you find value in watching other bowlers' reactions in conjunction with yours to make decisions? Hell yes. I spend so much time watching everybody, and this is especially pertinent considering that a couple pairs down, we had Brad Miller and Kyle Sherman, Ryan Burks, Casey Murphy was there, Shea Bittenbender and Tim Barrett were in from St. Louis, and those may not be more commonly known names, but for us in the general area, they're really, really well-known names.
Biondo was there too.
Yeah, Brandon Biondo was there.
The talent level at those Kansas City events is always ridiculous.
Yeah, Kevin
Like
Williams
that-
was there the
That's
second
something that
day.
blows me away when I come out there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's just even the guys that you know about, yeah, you'll watch the Brad Millers and the Kyle Shermans, but then when you see the other guys, and this is before we're even talking about the good local guys, Tom Patton, not bad for an old fat guy. No relation to Riley Patton, I don't believe, anyway.
None at all.
Pretty sure Tommy's from New York anyway, or at least he really sounds like it. But Tommy's one
Got
of these
the
guys.
attitude for it.
Yeah. I mean, Tommy's one of these guys that, you watch him bowl and you don't think it's anything special until he keeps striking and the pins keep falling down. And even when it looks like he's having a rough game, he'll come by later and he'll be complaining about something. He's like, yeah, I'm only 60 out of the number or something like that.
Yeah.
Just watching him from the Labor Day tournament last year, plus this a couple weekends ago.
Yeah.
He seems like one of those bowlers, just this annoying little gnat buzzing around your head. He never goes away.
He
always finds a way to keep himself around.
He's our Dennis Killough.
I got to bring that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's just one of those guys that has a stupidly simple game, and he just executes. And he knows ball reactions, he knows everything, and he knows every single lane and pretty well every single house in Kansas City to begin with. And he just executes. He just puts it there. And he'll say, I can't keep up with the young guys on the house shots, but when it comes to the tough stuff, he's always in the competition. So, but anyway, yes, definitely spend a lot of time watching what everybody else is doing, and sometimes that's helpful, sometimes that's not. You take a guy like Shea Bittenbender, who always plays 4th or 5th arrow. He starts at 4th arrow and just chases it left no matter what he's bowling on. He just kind of adjusts, looks, ball reaction, surfaces, shapes. He plays with shapes more than anything. I don't really think that he, unless something's just flat too much ball or not enough ball, he plays with shapes. He might bend it a little bit more. He might play a little closer to the pocket. He might fade it. He might push it. He might do whatever else, and he just uses whatever ball allows him to do what he thinks is the best thing to do. He's ridiculously good at it. Then you have guys like Brad Miller and Kyle Sherman that can pretty well do anything they want to do or whatever the lane gives them. And so those are the ones that you want to watch and keep track of, but at the same time, everybody has different games too. So you want to take the reaction information and apply that to your own game. Just because Brad Miller's throwing an all-road doesn't mean that I'm going to go to my bag and grab an all-road, but it's kind of important information if you watch, well, how fast is he throwing it? How much is he shaping it? Is he getting it out to 5 and getting it back, or is he playing it closer to the pocket?
It's about the concepts, pulling the concepts of what they're doing and figuring out how to implement that yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like another example of this, Riley, is I think you said you threw the Trident Nemesis a lot. I know you used it a lot on Sunday and some on Saturday as well.
Yep.
Is like, and I had a Rotogrip Daredevil with me, which, Shiny Sim, Shiny ASIM, they're a little different on paper, but the reactions that we got out of those respective pieces were pretty close. And so, vastly different. You and I throw it kind of differently. You have softer speed than I do, more forward roll, and generally smoother shapes, but same type of applications. We could kind of play off of each other for most of both days,
Right?
especially once you got into that Nemesis, because we're using the same reaction concepts essentially,
right?
Figuring out how to harness that for ourselves.
What's surprising, at least what was surprising for me, is your Daredevil is probably the snappiest Daredevil I've seen.
Yeah, I know, right?
And it could be just his roll, his release, his revs, everything combined. His thing was flying.
It was great. I loved it.
Yeah, it was fun to watch for sure.
Yeah.
And for all the marketing that Motive did for the Nemesis, saying it was the most angular pearl asymmetric that they've ever made, that thing is the slowest, most lumbering asim pearl I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It just gets
it's up there with the Golden Jackal, I'd say.
I don't want to talk about that ball.
Fair enough. Yeah, and you've got I think you have some surface on your Nemesis as well, is that right?
I think I hit it a little bit. It wasn't like insane. I may have hit it with a CTD 4000 pad on my ball spinner before coming, so I just knocked the shine off of it pretty much. That and the Super I did the same thing with.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think even though I was throwing it awful, I was kind of I was seeing the same things and I was in the same zone. That Marvel Max SE, if I'd have been able to throw it good, I think it probably would have been a pretty good option, because my wife was actually throwing her Code Extreme all day, which looked really good. I mean, she probably had the best ball reaction out of any of us, aside from when James got into Game 6 with his Daredevil.
That was actually the Reckham, but yes.
Oh, the Reckham, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, having I harp on this a lot, but Shiny Nano Pearl is amazing because it doesn't burn energy on friction. It has enough length to get down the lane, even on high friction lanes. It doesn't quit at the pocket, but it has enough traction to kind of dig through some of the heavier stuff. And so if I'd have been actually throwing it halfway decent, I think the Marvel Max SE or the Halo Burn would have looked really good, which was kind of in the same vein of what you guys were throwing until we got down to the very end of things, where James, you went to a Reckham, and then Riley got all the way down, or didn't really get down, but you ended up with a code, up. But at the same time, that's the weird thing, is I really like my Halo Burn for those late game moments where there's still just enough head oil to get the ball down the lane, but I need something to actually roll and tip, because when you're dealing with that much angle, some people think, well, it's dry, I need to automatically go to a high road pearl, but sometimes it doesn't have the guts to make the corner or make the turn, and so that's where I like a stronger ball overall that still gets down the lane, doesn't burn energy, and actually has, that asymmetry to help it pull back up and not just hit the pocket, but get through the pins the right way. But anyway, that's my NRG Pearl rant for the video.
Well, I mean, that's something you and I have talked about some, Luke, and I've got a friend of mine who's able to source a crystal physics that I'm going to have soon for that same reason, just NRG2 Pearl with the physics core.
Yeah.
I think same kind of concept, same kind of reaction, which isn't one that I think I'll use a ton, but it's one of those, if I'm going to a longer format tournament or something, it's going to make the bag, and if I need it, then it's going to totally save me. Is kind of how I'd view that type of reaction.
Anytime you come to Kansas City, that's probably the Halo Burn is my most valuable ball when I go to Kansas City. Or Riley, do you bowl Greater Tulsa Open?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yep. I actually bowled pretty well was the first time in the 3 years that I've done it so far this past year. So.
Yeah. Well, they fly down there too. So, I mean, there's just friction on top of friction and more hook and whatever else. And the halo burn actually looked pretty halfway decent down there this year too. So, anyhow, James, we'll let you talk about your game 6 since you're the only one of us that did anything halfway decent on Saturday.
Yeah, so to preface this, through 5 games, I had 1, 2. I doubled 3 times in my first 5 games. I think I shot at 4 single pin spares because the rest were all multi pins.
Yeah,
I had the number of crooked numbers I had was absolutely ridiculous. I was for the first 4 games, I was super rusty. I knew I was throwing it bad. I had no ball reaction. It was all aboard the struggle bus. And then I was talking with you with game 5, and I was just like, screw it. I'm just going to try to wreck them and see what happens. By that point, I was already in front of the ball return with my Daredevil.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got nothing to lose. I'm pretty much, I put in, I think, tournament entry plus side pots and all that I was in for 300.
Yeah.
And I've shot 819 for my first 5 games. I am winning exactly nothing doing that. Although, ironically, I actually came in second place in a bracket.
Yeah.
Before game 6. So I made a bracket final with probably like 170, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So then I ended up, I was way in front of the bar, and I think I was standing probably in the high 40s board count, and basically trying to land the ball and land my Reckham on 6th arrow at the arrows.
Mm-hmm.
And basically just trying to get the ball through the fronts, and there was so much friction in the middle of the lane, like 2nd arrow to 6th arrow. If you set the ball down there, it was hooking instantly. There was no oil there. There was no hold. There was no shape, no nothing. The shape would just be your ball burning up before it gets to 40 feet if you try to play that part of the lane. So essentially, that's what happens at a lot of these higher level tournaments, especially on flatter, longer patterns like this.
Uh-huh.
And so I just essentially, I took a guess when you went to our game 6 pair. I think I jumped another 4 or 5 left from where I ended game 5.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like, all right, I'm just going to step left and heave it and see what happens. And I split the 8-9 for the next 8 shots in a row.
Yeah.
Or 7 shots in a row. And then I had 9 pinned in the 8th frame because I got one to the friction too fast.
Yeah.
But it was essentially like, you mentioned how you kind of want something that'll be able to get down lane, but also have enough motor to pick up and actually go through the pins properly.
Yep.
And for you, that's the Halo burn, because you have a little softer handle, softer speed.
Mm-hmm.
The Reckham in these absolutely scorched earth scenarios is ridiculously good for me, and it's very similar to the MVP Pearl in that regard from the current line.
Yeah.
Is that it's this really heavy rolling but still continuous type of shape.
Uh-huh.
So as long as it sees enough friction, it's going to be motoring through the pins no matter how far left you get.
Yeah.
And I mean, even when I was, I never, the one thing I knew I didn't have to worry about was the ball not making the corner.
Yeah.
From 6th arrow.
Yeah.
So that was they were absolutely, the lanes were absolutely destroyed. I mean, Riley was playing hook stop with one of the most continuous balls motives ever made, basically.
Yeah.
So that tells you something about how much friction there was out there. And so I was essentially fighting that in a totally different way just by throwing a weak, really responsive continuous ball and basically get left and just kind of, I think the only time I got it right of 10 down lane was that 9 pin that I left.
Yeah.
And that was just an errant shot. So I was essentially letting the ball kind of pick up and almost walk back to the pocket to a certain extent, but I mean, still with some shape and some drive, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up, I went from losing $290 to losing $20 with one game, which felt pretty good. So that was, 278 after going 819 for the first 5. Feels good.
Mm-hmm.
That was that. Sorry, go ahead, Riley.
I was just gonna say I did the complete opposite and paid in $350 and made $20 from Saturday. So
woof.
I, on the other hand, I think I put in $100 because I got tournament entry and the eliminators, and I didn't even go up there and check because there was no reason to. So, and I think I ended the day with a wild streak. For some reason, Pen Pal won't register my bowling ball when I change it. I do the tap to select, I pick the ball, and then it never saves it for me for some reason. But I'm pretty sure that I was in the wild streak the last game, and I shot 220 something, which kind of at least salvaged it a little bit. And I thought I was feeling pretty good going into Sunday. I'm like, hey, I figured something out, and shocker, spoiler alert, that didn't happen. But anyway, to kind of recap things, we're also, I mean, again, 30 mils, 43 feet, 6th arrow with a Reckham.
Because logic.
Yeah.
Because holy friction, Batman.
Yeah. So another thing is even though we're on this much volume, even though there's high friction lanes, a lot of the time pros will use angle as length, because the more angle that the ball has to overcome to get back into the pocket, that kind of acts like oil at the same time. And when you have that much volume, if you leak it a little bit to the right, it's gone. If your angles are a little bit too straight from straighter angles, then it's still going to hook, because the middle of the lane is pretty well flat. And so you can use, that's why most of the time they migrate deeper, because they can use some angle as hold, and they keep it a little bit closer to the pocket. And because it's so flat in the middle, even though there's a lot of volume and a fairly decent length, it's actually going to hook stronger and more firmly than most house shots most of the time, because house shots are not flat, and there's just oil for days in the middle of the lane. So most of the time missing left on a house shot means it's not going to finish, where it's totally the opposite on something flatter. So more angle close to the pocket equals even 30 mils getting burned up fairly quickly. And then you add in the lane friction factor, which is something that people do not pay near enough attention to, and which is illustrated really well in Kansas City. I mean, that's just a place where lane friction shows you how much or how little the actual pattern matters. I don't even think I pay much attention to the pattern anymore. I mean, I bring some stronger stuff just because I'm probably going to need it for a game or two, but then the lane friction is going to factor in, and it's going to end up being Kansas City. No matter what pattern you start off with for the first couple games, it's going to go Kansas City from there, and you're going to be hooking the ball with lower end stuff or weaker stuff from.
It's a question of, does it start flat or does it start not flat, and that's about it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like pattern length and ratio, and I mean, even after 3 or 4 games, you're not gonna feel it.
Yeah, because it's gonna disappear so fast, and especially again on higher.
Yeah, I mean, by the end of by game 6, even starting on a pattern that was basically super flat, I had I had a pretty wide, I had probably about that much room I could hit at 42, 43 feet and strike.
Yeah, because you're so far left at that point that the angle is giving you a little bit of hold. If you tug a little bit, you're still getting hold because of the angle, and because there is still some oil out there, but there's so much friction too that if you get it a little bit right, it's going to grab the friction. It's going to have plenty of time to grab friction and pull back up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they were a little too gone for Riley to be able to get the ball down lane enough, but that's the same concept of like his Nemesis and Supra.
Yeah.
In his bag was to kind of serve that same purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I probably on Saturday should have thrown the shock most of the day, and I probably would have been fine with that. But I was just so fried by game 3, probably.
That's such a cliche for motive guys too. Is get out the Venom shock.
I mean, if it works, it works.
Get out the high road. Get out the IQ tour.
Yeah. Now I was crossing with at that eliminator last weekend. I was crossing with a friend of mine who's on motive staff down in the Charlotte area, Cole Payne.
Yeah. And
he was throwing a shock, and he went. It was the second round. It was just 2 games, and he went like 228, 270 something. And I just looked at him as he was walking back later in game 2, and I'm like, dude, why do you even bother? Like, why don't you just walk in with a bag of Venom shocks and call it a day?
Yeah.
For motive guys, that ball is just so good and does so many, it covers so many situations that is insane.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Okay, so when people ask questions about, okay, well, what's a ball up from this or what's a ball down from this, what ball does this fit in between, and they try to build their arsenals from kind of a top to bottom ball down situation. This is something that I actually want to talk about next week if either or both of you won't want to come back in. I want to talk a little bit about arsenal optimization, because just because an IQ tour is a step down from a phase 2 does not mean that they play in the same zones well. It doesn't mean that they I mean, especially the zones thing is something huge that I think certain balls play from different zones better. And I've covered that on a couple of my videos recently, or at the beginning of the year, something like a phase 3 and an idle pearl, where the phase 3 really doesn't like playing right of third arrow or on big friction. And so when I go to Kansas City, the phase 3 stays home because it just burns up and pukes. The idle pearl will play deeper the more friction you have, but it kind of prefers, like an idle, to play a little bit straighter. And so technically, even though the phase 3 and the idle pearl are kind of going sideways into each other, they have some attributes that make them very, very different in terms of on the lane play. And so ball up, if you're throwing a phase 2 and then all of a sudden, well, you get a little bit of track burn, you can't necessarily go straight down into an IQ tour and stay in the same place, even though it's technically a step down. So there's all the things we've talked about so far about Saturday are up and down across the board. It depends on so many different factors that some questions that are asked are really, really hard to answer, even though it seems like a simple question, and saying, okay, yeah, phase 3 is a step down from, or even a phase 3 is a step down from a halo pearl or something like that. It doesn't always work that way, and it's really hard to cover, even in a live stream, or especially in a video. In a live stream where we can kind of ramble at each other for a couple hours and throw stuff all over the place. Even something with the same core in it, it may not be a direct step down from an idle to an idle pro, because I think that those also play pretty different parts of the lane. So
yeah, and kind of to provide another illustration of that is, before I just drilled a blank Daredevil about a week and a half before I flew out to Kansas City. Before that like big block, like shiny, fairly responsive slot in my arsenal was an Astrophysics.
Yeah.
R2S Pearl, ASM core. Mm-hmm. The Daredevil, I'd say medium to medium strong shiny cover, but not as strong as like a phase 3 type of cover. Mm-hmm. Combined with the core that I don't remember the Daredevil numbers off the top of my head. It's like
it's 248,
249 diff.
041.
Or RG, and then an 041 diff. So mid diff, very low RG symmetrical. But because of how responsive that cover is, especially on the one that I drilled, it was like, if I'm traveling with 6, especially for a situation like a Kansas, where I'm bowling on long heavy sport and on a house shot the same weekend, I have zero reason to carry both, because they step off of each other very well. The Astro is actually a little cleaner, a little more responsive down lane than the Daredevil.
Yeah.
But they're close enough that I can't possibly justify both in a 6-ball bag.
Yeah. And so even though, the looking at them on paper, I mean, the Astrophysics is 248, 052, 053?
53, 018.
Okay, an 018 for the intermediate differential. Yeah. And asymmetric. And then you have the Daredevil that's kind of a slightly stronger, like IQ Emerald type of look, because it's the same idea. There's just a little bit more differential. And so that's also why, like Riley was saying, yours is the fastest one that I think, because mine was pretty well an Omega Crux, or a little bit cleaner, more responsive, no rules Pearl, which are pretty slow as far as pearls go. Almost Motive-esque. So slow and round, which means they're. And hey, that's not really a knock on Motive either, because that stuff, you try to knock motive, and then you watch Riley or Dylan Burns, especially. Dear God, because
Burns is insane.
because he likes to rap on. I mean, the Dylan Burns motive marriage is something that should never end because he can. Motive stuff is a little bit slower and a little bit rounder. For the most part, and he just likes to ram on it at the bottom, and it lets him do that without going crazy, without being super jumpy on friction, and so
without rolling out.
Yeah,
that's the other huge thing.
And so what was he throwing? Was he throwing that with the Trident Abyss, Riley? And you're saying, how the hell is he getting this to do this?
He's the Abyss and the Alpha Jackal share the same cover, and I was just talking to Austin Bolds, the guy that drills all my stuff at West Acres in Wichita, on Thursday, because I just finally picked up a Jackal Ghost. You can see it back there on my bed.
About time you got that ball.
So I'm one of the last people that to ever pick one of those up that only throws motive. But we were talking about what kind of a layout I'd put on the Ghost, and he was talking about how the Abyss is probably the earliest ball that he's seen from like any company in a long time. Like that thing just chugs and does not want to like turn left in a hurry at all. It has no interest in making big sweeping. I mean, it's just slow. It's
like a cracked prime.
Yeah. There's no other way to put it.
I think at one point on Saturday, this was probably like game 4 or 5, and I was, around like between 4th and 5th arrow with my Daredevil, just trying to grind something out. I look over and there's Birch and arrow left of me, knocking the holes out of a Venom recoil and splitting the 8-9 at will.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here like, what?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that may be why I like motive so much, is because it is quite a bit smoother. And I unlike a lot of people, use vacuum grips. So I just like to cram my fingers in the grips and get as much on it as I can. If I was talking with friends, or I'm always talking with friends, that you can reduce your rev rate. What is that? I've never even heard of such a thing.
Yeah.
So I always pretty much, if I'm throwing it 100% and it hooks too much, then I need to move left. If I'm throwing it 100% and it doesn't hook enough, I can move right. It basically is a simple way for me to adjust how I need to throw it. Is that if I'm always hitting at 100%, then it's either speed up, slow down, move left, move right. And I feel like I'm very much a feel player than a lot of other people. A lot of people really go into, or they have like a plan for how they should attack something.
Yeah.
And obviously, Earl Anthony at Ward Parkway was a good example of that plan won't always work.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because I bowled I crossed with Brad Miller at Aaron's, over the sometime November, December, something like that, and he got to the point where he was deep enough that he was off the dots. He was further left he was almost to the seam over there by there. I think he was even past it at one point. Because that would have been right on the gutter. Yeah, he was kind of past it. He was kind of in no man's land, and I'm like, okay, so what? I was just kind of joking with him. I said, so what do you count boards, or how do you keep track of how far left you are? And he's like, I really have no idea. I walk over there and kind of shuffle back and forth until I feel comfortable, and then I just go. And I think that's kind of the same way that I operate. Somebody says, what are you, or what's your target down lane, or what are you targeting at the arrows? I'm like, I don't know. I don't really know. I just kind of, and I've told people this before, if you get on the lane and you kind of shift your feet left and shift your feet right, you're automatically going to understand just by how comfortable you feel. I mean, if you're on a house shot and you're standing, right, you're automatically your brain's already telling you this is gonna hook, it's gonna hook, it's gonna hook, and so you're like, okay, well, we cheat left and we move left, and then all of a sudden things kind of click. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I think that this looks good, and so let's go with this. It may not work out, but at least it's a starting point, or if it's a reference point. And when you would think that when you're on the pro tour that you'd have stuff a lot more locked down than that, but again, it's one of those things that the best bowlers out there, and this is something that Rick Benoit's talked about on Facebook a couple times here recently. You know, the greats have that kind of sixth sense that they know, they just understand the game and they think differently, and it may not be conventional and whatever else. They just know how to knock pins down. And so I think that a lot of field players, Wes Malott's a field player too. So I think a lot of guys like that, and Pete Weber, my God, he didn't. He's got the most black and white thinking. I mean, you just hand him a ball and he'll put his hand in it and he'll just go and he'll make it work.
I think I've heard stories of him asking like his reps about what he should throw, and they just say, "Here, throw this ball," and he goes out and he just kills it every time.
Yeah.
They just hand him a ball and he just lets go of it, and they all fall down.
Yeah, he doesn't pay attention to layout. He doesn't know what the cover formulas are, what the core is, whatever. He throws the ball, he watches what it does, and that's all he needs to know. And I that's probably why he's one of the greats instead of the rest of us nervous nerds that overthink everything. And speaking for myself only, of course.
I overthink stuff sometimes too. Don't worry.
But all right. So aside from that rambling, let's go into the house shot. On Sunday, you would think that would be quite a bit more simple, which it kind of was, and it kind of wasn't. James, you kind of knocked the holes out of everything for the first 4 or 5 games. I mean, you were shooting 230, 240 every game.
Yeah, I was at 1162 after 5, I think, which was third high in the building.
Yeah. And it was a little bit flatter in the middle of the lane than you would expect a house shot to be. There wasn't quite the free length. If you missed left, it was going to start going. And there was just a little bit more hang outside than you might, normally see too. So everybody kind of migrated left, again, trying to mitigate that little bit of over-under, which wasn't near as bad as it was on Saturday. Yeah. But what was the plan of attack, Riley? Let's go on ahead and start with you. What was your what were you seeing, and what did you end up throwing on Sunday?
Yeah. Sorry, real quick before Angel just posted in the chat. Saturday was 6 games of 8 to a pair. Sunday was 8 games, so it was a longer format as well.
Yeah,
so it's still 8 to a pair
on less oil.
Yeah, what could go wrong? Sorry, Riley, go ahead.
No, that's totally fine. Anytime I hear house shot, almost the last ball that I know I need is an ASIM solid. So I ended up still bringing the same 6 with me that I had brought the day before. So I had the Alpha Jackal if I needed it for any reason, but I didn't even pull it out of the bag. The first one I started with was a Covert Revolt, and I shot 190 with it. And then James had mentioned us switching to the Nemesis just because like you were talking about with the friction in that building, that ball was starting up just early enough that it was losing enough energy. It couldn't quite make it around the corner, about 42 feet down the lane. Mm-hmm. So he had said, try the Nemesis. It'll be a little bit quicker and it may work better for you. And that's what I threw games 2 through 8 the entire rest of the day was that Nemesis.
Mm-hmm. Which that was actually kind of interesting because I'm watching you throw the Nemesis and get it out to a point where if the rest of us would have gotten the ball out that far that quick, it would have instantly kind of boomeranged and gone high, and you got to the spot and then it blended it well enough and went an extra couple feet and then kind of walked into the pocket. So that's also one of those situations. This is something that a lot of pros do at the same time, is sometimes a ball burning up, not saying it was burning up, but just kind of the idea of getting something to the spot and letting it walk in instead of always having to have an angular ball motion or something that looks powerful going into the pins. Sometimes they'll actually make ball choices to get the ball to intentionally burn up so that it gets to the spot and then just kind of walks into the pocket rather than, getting an extra arrow deeper with something more angular and trying to boomerang it off the spot. And that was kind of what it looked like to me, is that even though it wasn't burning up, it was kind of that idea of just getting it to the spot and letting it walk in.
100%. Like I was saying, that's got to be one of the slower, more lumbering asymmetric pearls I've seen in a while. and I can make it quick if I want to, but I don't think anything I was going to do that day was going to make that ball insanely jumpy off the spot. So I just felt comfortable with it. And I, at one point, I think it was probably game 6, I tried the Supra from the same spot because while it is an insanely clean cover on that Supra, the core in it is the modified primal impulse core. So it's still an 050 diff with like a 250 something RG.
Wow, I didn't realize the diff was that high in the Supra.
Yeah, it's an 050 with an RG of 257. I was just looking at it on the site. They modified the core from the primals for that one. So it's a super big core and an insanely clean cover on that ball. And it just turned sideways when it hit that same spot that I was hitting the Nemesis with. So I just stuck with the Nemesis for the rest of the time.
Yeah, so the Supra was essentially your boomerang ball for the weekend, right? Or just
It's
if you need massive directional change, that was the ball.
It's my Reckham.
Okay, that's fair.
And that's I think a good illustration of, it's a house shot, high friction lanes, so we had a bunch of friction, we had a ton of hook, and most people would think, okay, I'm going to use something lower end that's got a higher RG, cleaner cover, something that'll get down the lane better, but you're not necessarily always thinking about just getting the ball down the lane. And again, I'll go back to my Halo Burn. The cover, the polish on it gets it down the lane. It also kind of blends it a little bit more, and the asymmetry makes it consistent and firm at the break point, but the overall strength of the ball tames it down quite a bit, just kind of like the Trident Nemesis, and I've got my Halo Burn pinned down as well. So sometimes going with the boomerang is not the choice. And James, didn't you end up using the Daredevil most of the day, or did you?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't really talk about my strategy and my progression throughout the day.
Yeah.
So in practice, definitely noticed that the middle of the lane was a little flatter than most house shots, which that much was evident within about 2 shots. I got one to like 11 instead of 8 at the break point. I went Brooklyn. And I was like, oh, so that's how it's going to be. And so immediately from there, as soon as that happened, I knew I was going to be starting left. It was just a question of how far left and how steep I would have to get. I didn't throw a single shot with the UFO because there was just way too much friction, and the experience from Saturday on volume, knowing that this was going to be a lower volume pattern, and that we were still on the same lanes, and we were bowling 8 games. I'm like, I'm just not even going to bother with that.
Yeah.
So I threw a few shots with the Axiom, and I think it just dug in, hooked too early and too much. So I was just like, okay, so that's out. So that's already, I'm down to 3. My IQ Tour Solid, my Daredevil, and my Reckham.
Yeah.
And I might have thrown a shot with the Reckham, and it was just way too clean and responsive for the fresh.
Yeah.
So that was not an option. So now I'm down to 2, IQ Tour Solid and Daredevil. I was kind of in between them a little bit. I also didn't know how fast the lanes were going to be transitioning, and I felt like I had a good chance of striking with both of them at the end of practice. And so essentially I took the safe route, so to speak, out of the gate and went with my IQ Tour Solid.
And I think I kind of pushed you that direction too, because I think I'd seen a couple tournaments ago, or at Olathe East, I'd seen a lot of the guys once and Olathe East and Ward Parkway, the lanes kind of feel similar to me. Everything's a little bit weird. Pint and carry is a little bit weird. Both super high friction. And Brad and Tim and somebody else were kind of fading an IQ Tour through the middle and just kind of shimming it and letting it stop and kind of thump or whatever into the pocket. And I thought, well, that could be because there's plenty of friction in the middle there, that was something that could work, and it really didn't end up working well at all.
Yeah. So what ended up happening is my IQ Tour Solid lasted for all of 5 frames. I went strike, blower 7, missed the 7. So I hook up most of my spares on house shot. Unless it's a 10-pin, I'm probably hooking at it on house shot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, historically on Pin Pal, I'm literally like 98% on all single pins that aren't the 10-pin for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
I missed a 7-pin to the left in the second frame of game 1 because the ball hooked too much.
Oh, yeah.
And so at that point, I was like, oh, so that's how it's going. So like, I'm already thinking, okay, the middle of the lane is pretty flat, so I'm going to have to get left.
Yeah.
And then I missed a 7-pin to the left.
Mm-hmm.
That was like, oh, okay. So I went strike, and then I 10-pinned, and then I threw one. I thought it was a decent shot in the 5th frame. I got it probably another 2 or 3 right from where I was trying to actually hit at the break. When I was trying to get to like 6, 7, 8, I got one to 4, and it didn't touch the head pin, and I left a 1, 2, 8. And so at that point, that kind of clued me in. I knew I was in the. So think back to practice, and how I said that I'd already eliminated most of my gear.
Yep.
UFO, no chance. Axiom, no chance. Both of those were way too strong. Reckham, way too clean. So essentially, I'm back to my same decision I was at the end of practice of, do I throw the IQ solid or do I throw the Daredevil? And that shot where I missed the head pin, that was like the ball. I could see the ball kind of wanted to pick up, but it just couldn't make the corner from there. Mm-hmm. And so what I actually did was I went to my Daredevil, and I think I paralleled 2 and 2 left.
Yeah.
And that essentially my goal there was twofold. Number one, to literally move myself physically away from that hang spot a little more, but still keep that decent amount of launch angle so I can create some hold for myself. But also use a more responsive bowling ball that'll, once it sees friction, will pick up and go faster, or go, respond more quickly to friction, so that I could hopefully get it, moving away from that hang just a little bit. Plus, using a ball is going to see friction more. The theory was I would hopefully be able to get the ball started before it actually ever got to that hang spot, so that I could hopefully kind of try and neutralize that a little bit. And so I made that change in the 6th frame and promptly ripped off a 6-bagger, going from 85 in the 5th to finish with a 232.
Yeah. And
I threw the Daredevil for the next, let's see, games 2, 3, 4, and 5. So my first 5 games were 232, 229, 223, 243, 235. And, had a, I went 4-5 in the second frame of game 2, so that was fun.
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah, I somehow got everything but the 4-pin. I'm not sure how that happens. And then just essentially, I just kept chasing it left, and as long as I got the ball to the spot, like as long as I got the ball to like 6, 7, 8 down lane, without throwing it too fast, like getting it there, but giving it time to pick up and recover. Mm-hmm. Like I had no fear of the ball missing the spot. And it was kind of it developed into that same theme that we saw very late in the day on Saturday of being able to get there and have a lot of trust. And then game 6 was another disaster. I shot 149. I missed a 4-7 and 2 10-pins, all because my ball overhooked. Yeah. Yes, Riley, didn't you miss a 10-pin by like an arrow to the left because it hooked too much that game?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I did.
I've never seen a Midnight Sniper hook 15 boards.
Yeah. It's a common occurrence for me with my softer ball speed.
Yep.
That's why I've been trying to work on, even at 10 pins, just getting more up the back of it with a spare ball. Because I used to throw like a white dot or a T-zone at my corner pins, and those go dead straight. Like those, I could put anything around it. I'd go all the way around it, whatever. And they always went straight. But the snipers, being a mix of plastic and urethane, they hook a little, and their cores that are in them, although they're small, they will turn a little bit. So I've been just trying to work on getting up the back of it more for my 10 pins, because it will turn for me, and it's a common thing in League. I'll miss it by a tiny amount. So.
And this is something else that people probably don't realize as much. Obviously, the pros are quite a bit better than the rest of us are, but the two, I would say, major things that they look for while they're bowling is they're going to use their A game, if at all possible, and they're going to find whatever gives them the most miss room, because that has a way of also making you relax. It makes you more comfortable. It frees up your arm swing. that's that. Sometimes I remember Simo making a comment on TV one time where he just wasn't. It looked like he wasn't bowling well, but he said he came back on one shot and he said, "I think the word is uncomfortable." And so when you feel like you're bowling in a phone booth, it really tightens you up. You start trying to force things, and there is nothing better than being able to play your A game and having a couple boards of miss room. And out on tour, that's not very much. They don't really need more than a couple boards, but if they feel like they can free their arm swing up and they have a little bit of room to throw at, that's going to loosen them up, and everything. It's just going to be kind of a snowball effect. And so if you can get too comfortable, even if the lanes are tight, you're still going to do better than probably most of the field is going to do. So they don't always just line up and split boards because they're better than the rest of us. They use the same techniques as a lot of regular bowlers do. They just execute them a whole lot better than we do, and obviously they know a whole lot more than we do too. So they're able to find comfortable a whole lot easier. They watch the bowlers that they're bowling with. They watch the bowlers that they're following, if they can. I know that they have a whole lot more random lane assignments on tour than we do in tournaments. In tournaments, we're just hopping a lane or moving two pairs to the right. Well, we can see who's in front of us. We can see where they're playing on the lane, what kind of ball reaction they're getting, what they're throwing. And so somebody that asked a little bit earlier if you're watching anybody else besides your own ball reaction, we're watching the entire house.
You're watching the entire house, but you're especially watching the
guys. Yeah, the guys that are in front of you.
Yeah, is like a good example of that is I bowled the 2017 extra frame stop down in Wilmington. I actually bowled in that. It was the first PBA event I ever did, and it was this was going into my last game of the second day of qualifying, and I had been doing okay. I think I was about even through 5 games, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I take a peek down to the pair that I'm going to, and I see that Kyle Troop is around the same part of the lane as me, playing. He was throwing an Alpha Crux at that point. I was throwing a Phase 2, which are fairly similar balls reaction wise. Yeah. And so where he's throwing the Alpha Crux, he was in like 5th arrow or just left of and just shot a pretty big game. I think he shot like 250 or 260. And I was like, oh, there must be something getting way left on that pair. Mm-hmm. So I went to that pair and I took that hint and I jumped another 8 left off of the last pair, stayed in my Phase 2, and I had the front 6 and ended up got 260 something for my last game of the tournament. So there's always little tidbits you can be gathering to kind of get back to that question. Filtering, if it's a big enough field and you have enough time to watch, kind of filtering down mentally to people who throw it like you and people who throw it and people that are doing well.
Yeah.
Combine those two, and that's a good way to kind of figure out who you should be watching to see, like who's creating good ball motion and good shapes, and kind of use that to get an idea in your head of what you need to be creating. And then from there, it's all about knowing your bag and knowing how you can use the tools you have, both physically and equipment-wise, to be able to essentially try and replicate or take that same concept and apply it to your own bowling.
Yeah, and that's a good point about moving the 8 boards left. There's a lot of times where people will just pay attention to their own bowling and almost kind of act like they're the only people bowling on the pair. And so they could have 3 or 4 people bowling inside of them or further left than they are. And when their ball starts to overhook, they'll move, well, I'm just going to go ahead and move 2-3 boards left. And then all of a sudden it hooks early and it hooks more, and that they're somehow confused. But it's like, well, you've got 3 or 4 guys that are inside of you that's been beating up the heads there for a couple games now. So definitely I spend a lot more time paying attention to everybody else's ball reaction besides my own. Plus it can kind of clue you off to moves that you need to make that you can go on ahead and make. If you see the couple bowlers in front of you, all of a sudden their balls are starting to sneak up when they hadn't been the last time you were on that lane, you might think, okay, well, I struck last time in this lane, but now everything's going high for them, so that's kind of a clue. I might need to go on ahead and make a blind move and just trust yourself and trust the equipment, make the best shot that you can. There's way too many people that will wait too long, that they'll wait until they leave a 4-pin or wait until they leave a split or something like that. I was bowling when the U.S. Open was in Wichita. I've said this a couple times, but I was in 2018. I was crossing with Matt Ogle, and he ended up leading the PTQ.
Yeah, he bowled really well that week.
Yeah, and I crossed with him, and so I got to see all of it. And he would leave a 4-pin and instantly move 4 boards left, change balls, shell down, ball down, cover down, whatever else, and he'd be right back on it. And that's the thing where I think as bowlers are getting more confident, they're a lot of the time too afraid to make moves because they're like, well, I'm kind of comfortable right here. I know what's going on right now, and if I make a move, I don't really know what's going to happen. But the only way to find out what's going to happen is to go on ahead and make the move and find out.
Yeah.
Because one of the bigger things is experience, because not everybody's game is going to process the same way. Point in case, Riley, I wanted to get to this with Brandon Biondo, who is the king of move right and...
Spin Daddy.
Yeah. Move right and bring out the flamethrower. He was throwing an IQ Emerald, and when everybody else was moving left, he was firing. I mean, he was giving it the high hard one from like second arrow. The ball didn't really wrinkle. He just kind of knuckled it right in there. And he had the front 8 or 9 something, game 4, 5, 6, something like that. So that's when it's good to pay attention to what everybody else is doing, but it's also just as good to know your own game and know what you're good at. I don't know why he would ever move left and try to shape it.
And that's what's crazy is because he can do both way left and way right extremely well. I mean, he bowls for WSU, so he's going to be already a very good bowler. But there was one tournament that he was bowling a doubles with Lucas Pajakovic at Lunar, and that's what he did the entire day. It was another 8-game doubles thing like it was here at Ward. It was either, like you say, it was either an IQ Emerald or it was a God, why am I blanking on it now? The MVP Pearl. He does that with both of them. He'll just fire it, tilting with like probably 200 to 300 revs somewhere in there.
Yeah.
It's not a ton of hand, but he can get a ton of hand in it if he needs to. And he'll just fire it at the pocket, and they just crumble and they fly around. It's just incredible.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess I can talk about my travesty of most of the day. So James and I ended up making money in the Eliminator, in both Eliminators actually, and that's where the majority of our cash back came from. And
you're welcome, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because you literally carried us in the Eliminator for 5 solid games, and then when you did have the down game in Game 6, I finally shot something decent, and somehow 380 made it through the Eliminator. Both games that game, because I shot 220, and I even had 8 out in the 9th frame for something. I can't remember what that frame. It was a 4-9, which was actually it pissed me off because I went turkey 8 spare, turkey 8 spare, 4-9 to kind of kill a decent game. And so I'd started out with the wild streak, and I think I tried to use it most of the day, even though it wasn't the greatest look by a long shot. And I was throwing it awful. I mean, to the point where, I thought that I had figured something out, and then I had the major yips. I don't know what the hell happened on Sunday, because I thought I'm throwing it pretty good. On Saturday, it's going to be crispy. I'm going to be in here again. We're looking good. And then I had the total frickin' yips. Something was way more off than normal, and I just couldn't. I couldn't do anything. It was pretty ridiculous. And so I shot 160 something, 150 something, 170. 211, 179. I don't know how that 211 happened. I think that was an accident. Yeah, that was an accident. I was throwing terrible shots, and everybody was saying, "Oh, you're doing fine." I'm like, "No, I'm not." And then come to find out, the whiskey fans in here, I have never in my life been in a bowling alley that has both Lafroig and Aberlour. I mean, it was ridiculous. I'm like, you know what? I'm tilted, my brain's cramped up. I'm going to go get a drink and try to just kind of relax and, let everything kind of mellow. And I walk in there and they've got Lafroig in there. And I'm like, what the crap are we even... I mean, I can't even find that stuff at like Yard House in Kansas City. I mean, they've got Johnny Walker Blue Label, which is like $25 for a shot of that. But they had some good stuff in there, and so my brain uncramped and I relaxed, and then I went to I was waiting all day really to throw the Halo burn, and so I went to that, and that's what I shot the 222 and the 245 with. Then we got into the last game, and the lanes were just so burnt that nobody really had a look. I mean, they were just, and this is a funny thing, is I normally go from my Halo burn down to my high road tee, which are about two of the most opposite balls that you can go to, but it's just the way that they function. That's kind of how it works for me. And just never could get anything going. Yeah, I had some splits and several opens to start the game and finished it kind of halfway solid, but nothing really doing. I think, James, you shot 170 or 180 or something?
To explain this a little more, the skip procedure for the event, it's a 24 lane center.
Yeah,
we're bowling 8
so
games,
it's kinda weird.
and normally for the Kansas City tournaments, they have you skip a pair. So if you start on 1 and 2, your game 2 is on 5 and 6, then you're on 9 and 10, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So given that there are only 24 lanes in the center, you're bowling 8 games. That means if you do skip a pair, your game 7 would be on your starting pair, and your game 8 would be on your game 2 pair.
Yeah.
And so what they did was for game 6, you moved one instead of skipping one.
Yeah.
And so that was, I don't remember who started on that pair, but they totally destroyed it because everything hooked a lot.
Uh-huh.
And so game 6, I went 4-6-7, 4-pin, 10-pin. Ball change, tried to play a fallback with my IQ tour solid. It didn't move, and I punched out the 3-pin.
Yeah.
Then a 4-7 that I missed to the left. Then a double. Then another 10-pin that I missed because my ball hooked. And then I think I finally got to my recum in like the 9th or 10th frame, and I was like, oh, I should have been throwing this the entire game.
Yeah.
But no, my game 8, I think because Riley, you were bowling before we were in the order on the pair, I think.
Yeah.
If I remember
And
right.
so I saw you throw one shot. I think it was on 17 and 18, I think was the pair, or 19 and 20, one of those two.
Mm-hmm.
I have no clue.
So somewhere on the high end of the house, but not the end pair. I saw you throw one shot, and it hooked at 25 feet with your nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, where's my recum? I'm moving left. And so I grabbed my recum, and I think I blind guessed, planted my feet on like 52, and just literally threw the ball as far as I could. Not as hard as I could, as far as I could. And I had, I went 7-pin, blower 7, stone 9, and this is playing 6th arrow with an entry level ball.
Yeah.
And then turkey, 10-pin, which is my fault, double, got one to the friction early and went 4-4 in the 9th frame on a double.
Yep.
So that hurt. I ended up finishing with 208, but I mean,
okay. So yeah.
if you give me a 9 spare in that 9th frame, that's like a 230 instead of a 2-0.
Yeah.
So that hurt a little bit. Yeah, it was an all right finish. It could have been better, I think. And this was a lesson learned for me for future Kansas City events. Is I'm never bringing a snow tire ball again. The biggest ball I'm going to bring is like an Axiom or a Phase 2.
Yeah, Axiom Phase 2 is really all you need.
And then, because the issue I ran into this was especially in Game 6, where on that pair that was just absolutely trashed, and then in Game 8 as well, is the recum was really close. It was just a little too responsive.
Uh-huh.
And so that's where I have a 4.5-pin Hustle Link that I carry quite a bit. And that's where that ball would come into play. Is kind of that similar entry level weaker type ball, but it's going to be able to get it's going to be a little slower off of friction, a little rounder, a little smoother. Mm-hmm. And so in those situations where it's just absolutely burnt to a crisp, and I at least want to hit the pocket, the ink is a little more valuable in that role for me. So that's one that'll probably be making the bag when I go out there for KC Open in September.
Okay.
For that reason. But I know my goal coming in for the day was I knew having that 278 on Saturday was honestly huge momentum-wise. And so I knew coming in I wanted to not overcomplicate things with my decision making, just keep it simple, trust my eyes, make good shots. And my main goal going in was I wanted to avoid the disaster games.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately I did have that one in Game 6. I mean, the fact that I missed a 4-7 to the left and I missed 2 10-pins because my plastic ball hooked, like, I don't know. I think I deserve a little bit of a pass on that.
Yeah.
I have since repolished my plastic ball, by the way.
Yeah.
So lesson learned on that front. But it was the 149 did knock me down a lot. I was in third for scratch singles after 5, ended up falling down to 15th between games 6 and 7.
Mm-hmm.
So that fall hurt me a little bit. I clawed my way back up a little bit in game 8, but it was, overall it was a solid day. I felt like I threw it pretty well all day, and honestly, if I just kind of make a few decisions a little different game 6, I think it could have been a lot better, and that would have made me quite a bit more money. But I think between the 2 tournaments, I was right at break even.
Yeah, so
So
that's pretty good.
Considering I shot 819 for my first 5 on Saturday, I will take that and run to the nearest exit.
Okay, now for Riley, it was a fairly uneventful day. I think you threw the Nemesis pretty well almost all day, but you and Bo,
great.
But yeah,
Games
you and Bo did pretty good. Where'd you guys end up finishing? Because you never really had huge games, but you just consistently were shooting good games like the entire day.
We tied Biondo and Ryan Burks for 3rd and 4th.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up there. If I wouldn't have had 2 sub 170 games, because game 6 I shot a 154 and game 8 I shot a 164. Mm-hmm. And if in either of those games I could have picked up one more spare or anything, like, because I can see in game 6 I missed a 6-pin. How do you miss a 6-pin? Like, it's just not excusable.
I mean, that was because your spare ball hooked 15 boards again. But.
I mean, yeah, there's that. then the start of what was it? Game 8. Start of game 8. I missed a 2-pin left because it hooked. I'm pretty sure I missed that one left because I try not to rev the left side spares with the spare ball, but it's kind of hard to do when you've only got 2 fingers in it.
Yeah.
So my bad games. Luckily, if I remember right, Bo had a relatively decent game to keep us in it. And when I had a good game, he had either a close to 200 or like a 220, 210. Mm-hmm. So we were relatively decent the whole day.
He's left-handed though, so
yeah,
he doesn't have quite the adventures we do on the right side. Now, for a few closing thoughts on the weekend, despite the patterns for the 2 days being ridiculously different, James, you ended up playing, I mean, the game plan was similar, the zones were similar, kind of the idea, aside from the first couple games. I think that everything was kind of fairly similar once we got into things as far as zone play on the lane and where we ended up playing, and probably not the equipment that we ended up playing with.
Yeah,
but compare the 2 days.
It didn't follow my initial game plan on Saturday at all.
Yeah,
because I was kind of going off the past few years of the World Championship and kind of watching how the guys are playing for that, and everybody was like right and throwing decently strong slow stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was kind of be how it would play out, and that ended up getting thrown out the window in about 4 shots.
Yeah,
and so that was good. That was a good example of why I always, like, especially for tournaments like this where I'm walking in full blind, is I'm gonna kind of plan to, like, I'm gonna have a base idea, mm-hmm. but I'm also gonna go in with the understanding that what I'm planning isn't probably what I'm going to end up doing. It's a starting place to kind of evaluate and adjust on the fly.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means going to 4th arrow with a Daredevil in game 2 on 43 feet, 30 mils.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just that's all a matter of getting the experience under your belt to be able to kind of see and understand this stuff. especially on tougher patterns, and then just trusting your eyes and trusting your moves as much as anything else. Like, as funny as this sounds, I'll actually practice moving when I'm practicing sometimes. Like, I'll throw a shot and I'll strike, and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to move 10 and 6 left, and let's see if I can still strike from there.
Yeah.
And so being at like practicing, especially for someone like me with a higher rev rate, is, if I'm in a tournament, I 3-6-10, I'm moving at least 5 boards most cases.
Mm-hmm.
Like with 5 with my three, like probably like a 5 and 3, something like that at minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And so as practicing those moves, it kind of builds up in practice, kind of builds up that confidence to where you can just say in a tournament, well, I got to move 5, so let's move 5 and just throw it good and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And that the ability to make that move and trust it is, I think, something that a lot of people could, like, even for myself, that was something I had to learn, was to be able to build that trust to make those big moves. And to, see, like, on Saturday, it's like, well, it looks like this next pair is sucking a lot, so I just got to move further left and hope that's the right move and take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, bowling is really just a long series of educated guesses, because you don't know exactly what the ball is going to do until after it's done it. I mean, we've all had thousands and thousands of shots where we absolutely pure it off our hand, and all of a sudden it stops and goes through the nose, and it's like, what the hell happened here? Last time I was on this lane, it was a strike. Now it's a big 4. And so you start sometimes thinking, well, I had to have done something wrong. Sometimes you didn't. Most of the time, probably, if you went from strike to big 4 in one frame, that's probably an indication that you did something that you didn't think that you did. But
so I had a good example of a shot that I thought was really good this past weekend in Oklahoma. Not
that shot. Not that shot.
Bo and I went down to another singles tournament at Planet Bowl in Midwest City, Oklahoma City area. And I was in the quarterfinals match, and in practice on this pair that we were bowling on, I was the whole day, it was an iffy house pattern. Like, it was modified house, but if you got it weight just a bit too far out, it was going to 210, 28, 2810 the whole day. And then you had a decent amount of hold, so you had to just not get it too far right. And after 6 games of qualifying, I was able to, on this pair that I was bowling on, I could get it far enough right because there had been enough traffic on it. So I was like, great, I'm going to be totally good for this quarterfinal match. And partway through it, I throw a shot that I really like, and I 3-6-10. I'm like, where did that come from? The last time I was over here, I 2-pinned.
Yeah.
Like, how does that happen? So then I spare it, and I move to the next. I switch to the left lane. I strike over there, and then the next time I'm up, I move 2 boards left off that 3-6-10, and I 2-8-10. I'm like, what? And now I'm totally lost, and that was really confusing for me then. But I ended up losing that game because I left 2 2-8-10s because I was just totally lost.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, the unfortunate thing about, sometimes you see guys on TV and you think, well, wow, they bowled significantly better than the rest of the field all week if they're on TV, and then they shoot 170 or 180, and people are pretty quick to be armchair quarterbacks, but you can bowl well the entire week, and you can be a great bowler, and then you can get in a situation where you're just not matched up, things aren't making sense, and one game goes really, really quickly, and you only have, on one lane, you only have, 5 shots on one lane, and then theoretically 7 shots on the other, to kind of figure things out. And so if you have a couple bad frames, and especially if you're going from lane to lane and they play different and whatever else, sometimes you just find yourself trapped in a lack of ball reaction and just don't have enough time to dig yourself back out of it. And I think evidenced by, the couple of down games that you had, despite bowling really well, and the kind of aberration on the day for James in Game 6, where you just hit a bad pair, and then Game 8, there was just everything was just flat hooking out the building. You just couldn't. It was just a struggle to get it down the lane.
Yeah. Looping back to the TV comment real quick is I was watching. So another thing. This is a sidebar to the sidebar.
Yeah.
I am a huge believer in eye training for learning how to manage ball motion properly. And I think the single best way you can do that, in my opinion, is by watching flow bowling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, I didn't really start watching it until probably about 3.5 years ago, give or take. But binging that, and the amount of flow I've watched during this whole COVID thing has been insane.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Watching ball motion, seeing the difference between good and bad ball motion in a particular situation, seeing how you can make your ball go through the pins differently, and seeing how guys kind of manipulate that. And the guys on tour are the best in the world at managing lane play and ball motion. Yes, they are accurate. Yes, they repeat shots. But they're always looking to create margin for themselves by any way possible.
Yeah. And
they are better than anybody else in the world at doing that, especially when they're hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so watching that is, watching flow is a really, really good way to do that. And shoot, I just forgot the original sidebar.
Yeah. I'll make a point, and if you remember it, then...
I remember. Okay. Got it. You were talking about guys, struggling on TV sometimes. Chris Barnes' 2000 season, he made 11 shows, won 0 titles.
Yeah.
Or however many, he made a stupid number of shows and didn't win anything.
Yeah.
Even the last full-fledged PBA show, the World Championship, EJ Tackett was top 3 most of the tournament and led all of match play up to the very last game.
Yeah.
And then he gets to TV, has one game of no ball reaction, shoots. He had to grind to get to 180. Yeah. And ended up losing to Simo in the semis, finished 3rd in the event. And ironically enough, the day or two before the TV show during match play, I remember Tim Mack came in the booth for a quick visit with the Flow Bowling guys, and he was talking about the difference between match play and the TV show, and he said something to the effect of the guy you can roast the guys who bowl bad on TV. But the people who consistently bowl bad on TV are bowling good all week to get there.
Yeah.
And the people who bowl bad on TV, that only happens to good bowlers.
Yeah.
Because if you're not a good bowler, you're not making TV in the first place.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of bowling. Bowling is a very interesting sport, in my opinion, because it's very much it's a bunch of short-term outcomes driving another kind of short-term outcome, but then you have a much longer-term outcome on top of that. The very short-term outcomes are, individual shot. The kind of intermediate on top of that is a game. And then the higher level past that is a tournament or a season, whether it be in league or, out on the PBA tour or, even a season of Greater KC tournaments out where you are. And it's kind of building that. This is something else I've worked on a lot, is building that durability of one shot or even a game doesn't define a season. One season doesn't define a career. It's much bigger, and to kind of take a more long-term, durable approach to that, and just know that I could beat myself up till Kingdom Come for that 149 that I had in Game 6, but that's just going to happen sometimes, and I did the best I could. And I learned a few things from that game, and next time I see that kind of situation, I'm going to be better for it.
Yeah.
And it's there was a Bowling This Month article that I read a while back that was the core thesis of it was sometimes you win, sometimes you learn.
Yeah.
And it's always, like you said, earlier in the stream, is every shot, unless you just completely throw it out the window, you can learn something from that. And so, always be learning, always be absorbing.
Man, I've been learning stuff my whole life.
Yeah, I have too.
Learning hardcore.
Yeah.
I don't know what this W word is, but...
Yeah. You know what I mean, though. It's like even in success, I was talking with a friend of mine about last week about my my bowling in the UBA heavyweight series down here in the Southeast. And I was like, I went, aside from my 2 matches versus Dennis, I went something like 9-0 last season in head-to-head best-of-7 matches, which is pretty freaking good. Can't really do much better than that. But I'm still looking at it, and I'm like, I could have done better from those. And so, whether it be a win in a tight match or grinding out and trying to keep it close but ended up losing in one of my matches versus Dennis, or even a match where I just kind of let up a little bit mentally because I was up in the match by a decent margin and just kind of didn't really keep the hammer down. There's always something to be learning, always something to be getting better at. I think that drive to improve, that drive to learn, that drive to get better, I think that separates higher level bowlers from kind of the middle of the pack guys quite a bit.
Yeah, and there is a good point in there too. Bob Benoit, who's a former touring pro, lives here in Topeka, brother of Rick Benoit. Bob shot the 2nd or 3rd, something like that, 300 on TV ever in the first one, and only one of 2 in title matches. And he said the only reason I shot 300 that game is because Roth shot 250 at him. And up until the 9th frame, I mean, Bob didn't know he had won the tournament until the 10th ball, because Roth, I think, 9 spared in the 6th or 7th frame. And so until Bob got up in the 10th frame and struck, the tournament was still in question. I mean, it could have gone sideways, and so he had to keep striking. He's like, well, if Roth would have had a couple bad frames early on, he's like, I probably would have gone into safety mode or something like that and just tried to stay out of trouble. But he's like, I had to keep striking. There was just no other option, no other alternative. So, let's see, Riley, do you have any final thoughts on the weekend? Is there anything that really stood up for you other than that 10 pin? Or
no, just I'm gonna not need as aggressive equipment as I thought originally. I mean, that was the second and 3rd time I'd bowled in that center ever. The first time I sucked and struggled, and that first time I was on 39-foot Don Carter, and that pattern is tough, obviously. So I've so far only bowled well, or what I would consider to be well, once there, and it was on a house shot. So
yeah. I've only bowled twice there. I bowled one, and I think it was on the Carmen Salvino pattern the first time, and then the second time was a house shot. But now after the weekend, I kind of get Olathe East vibes. The lanes aren't quite as frictiony and dirty as Summit. James hasn't experienced Summit yet, but you'll see.
That's one of the KC Open houses.
Yeah, that's the team house for Grady KC Open, and you want to talk about dirty, just straight up filthy.
Nice.
And then Lunar is somewhat similar to Westridge down here. I don't think that they run quite as much oil as Westridge does, but the attributes are kind of fairly similar. But yeah, I get kind of Olathe East vibes from Ward Parkway now, and it's always difficult to bowl on tougher shots there because the carry's kind of weird to begin with, and the friction's hard enough to deal with on a house shot, but when you have something that's a lot higher volume like that, things go sideways and get kind of wonky. So whenever anybody asks a question about what's a ball down, what's a ball up, I'm going to this tournament and this is the pattern, what balls should I take, what surfaces should I put on them, we don't even know most of the time until we're out of or getting done with practice. And then not even. We take a bunch of if you're going into an unknown situation, sure, you want to take a well-rounded kind of generalist bag like James brought, and then a whole lot of Abralon pads. You can't just put something at, well, I think that because of this pattern, I'm going to need 2,000 grit on this ball. Well, you may get there, and if you don't have any pads and 2,000 doesn't work, well, that ball is essentially useless to you, so it's just another ball that's going to sit in the bag. And so a lot of this stuff is experience, and anybody that's worried about tournaments, you just have to get out there and bowl them, but you have to pay attention to everything that's going on. That's why I said something good to get Pen pal, and especially, like you guys were saying, you noticed that, as the lanes got drier, your plastic started overhooking. So that's another mental note to make. Next time, you might get the ball a little bit further right instead of going straight at the pin. There's always information, and not just from you, from everybody else. And you can't get into a tournament and then get out of a tournament and think, well, this didn't go so well, so I'm bad at this or I'm bad at that. Sometimes you just don't match up, and that's a pretty hard thing to take sometimes, because I tend to personally think, well, if I'm actually good, or if I'm actually good at doing this, I should have recognized this sooner, I should have made better shots, I should be able to do this, or I should be able to do that. But there's even pros that get into tournaments, and they could be crossing with somebody, which crossing with somebody means that you're bowling with somebody. You're bowling on the same pairs whenever you move whenever you move pairs, you go with the same ones. There can be good pros on the same pair as other good pros, and half of them are bowling lights out, and the other, can't find anything with anything. So
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to hit their bowling bag with the ball, much less the pins.
yeah, exactly. So
here's a question that I saw over in the Discord server a few minutes ago that I think is a really good thing for us to discuss in this context.
Okay.
This applies more for me than for you guys, since I was flying and had a more limited arsenal.
Yeah.
But it's still something good to discuss, and that is in the context of a tournament or of a weekend of tournaments like this, both during the tournament and after. I think there's a tendency among, especially even up to mid-level and some higher level bowlers, is like, oh, well, if I only had X ball, I would be fine, but I don't, so I have nothing.
Yeah.
And this goes back to arsenal planning a little bit, but more so in the moment after. How do you both digest this, think through in the moment, just kind of like, how do you deal with that in the moment? First off, I think that's the bigger question. But then after the fact, how do you kind of what's your process for conducting a post-mortem and seeing, trends either short or long term from that center, or tournaments in general, of things you might need to change in your bag? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I guess, Riley, do you want to start this?
Yeah. What are your thoughts there, Riley?
A lot of it for me is I don't need something. And I think Belmo said it in the video when they were first releasing the timeless, I think it was actually you, Luke, in your video, the timeless. I've been going back and watching a whole bunch of them. That two-handers especially don't need a ball that just turns sideways. So that's very often not a motion that I require. The Supra is there in case I need it, because I can get any ball to turn sideways.
Yeah.
But if I have four of them, then I'm going to be pretty limited on what I can do. So I generally swing towards the smoother equipment. And the Nemesis for me is surprisingly controllable for being a snappy ASIM Pearl.
Yeah.
So I just really like smooth stuff. And before the Nemesis, it was a Rogue Blade in that spot.
Okay, yeah.
So
that's the red one, right?
Yep. Okay. That's the Sigma core with the Hexion Pearl cover.
Yep, that's right.
So it was another Rolly Pearl, basically a Daredevil.
Ooh, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, and it actually worked really well the last time I bowled at Summit Lanes. So I may bring it back. I may just stick with the Nemesis. So and a lot of for me, I've been in situations where it's, if only I would have this thing. I try and there was a series that Tamer Bowling had out on his channel not too long ago about how to build an arsenal, how you should have a strong define, strong control, or at least just general, if you don't know what you're going for, strong define, strong control, mid define, mid control, and then light late or something like
medium
that.
late or something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I've done. And for Saturday, I didn't really have a strong defined motion. I would call that my forged fire, and even that gets too far down the lane sometimes for me. So this Ghost is gonna I think for majority of the places that I bowl, gonna take that strong defined spot from the Alpha, because the cover on the Alpha is just so much stronger. even though it's the exact same core between the two, the cover on the Alpha is just so much stronger. So the Ghost will be a bit quicker off the spot. And then down from that is my favorite ball of all time, the Covert Revolt, which is probably Motive's best control ball aside from the Venom Shock.
Yeah.
And then under the Revolt is the Nemesis. With the cover, it gets down the lane. It's got a little bit more shape than both of those, but it's not turn left immediately. It doesn't fly off the spot. So it's another smooth, controllable shape. The Shock is a Shock, so it's one of the best they've ever made. And then the Super is my late ball. So I just try and get stuff that's relatively smooth, because again, I can make stuff turn sideways if I need it to. So I go for smooth stuff and then try and really work on myself on perfecting my releases and making sure I'm versatile, being able to get up the back, having a little bit more rotation, and then even more rotation if I need it, so I can play different parts of the lane.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Do you ever get in the middle of a block or something and kind of find yourself thinking like, oh, I'm close, but if only I had a Forged Fire instead of the Nemesis in my bag, or something along those lines? Like, how do you process that in the moment? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or just like throwing out like, that's obviously just one example, but if only the general concept of, if only I had X ball with me instead of what I've got right now. Like, how do you process that in the moment?
You just kind of have to keep going along, try and see if you can make whatever you're using work as good as possible, is what I've done so far. A lot of times if something's not picking up, I'll just move a little bit right. And if it still doesn't pick up, I'll move further right or get more up the back of it to really roll it to get it to pick up. So I did that Thursday. We were bowling on 46-foot Johnny Petraglia in the Wood Lane Center here in McPherson. And on the left lane, if I got around it, it never moved. And on the right lane, I didn't have to get around it, but it always came back if I got around it with my Nemesis. So on the left lane, I was playing more up the back, tighter to the pocket, and just throwing it right on the right lane. So a lot of it for me just comes down to trying to be as versatile as I can and making it through with as few bad games as possible.
Yeah, and I think that that's one thing that people don't consider. There's kind of the theme there is something that most people don't consider, is they look at a lane graph and think, okay, I'm going to need this ball, this ball, this ball, and this ball. Those balls may not necessarily fit their game and or be the specific ball they need when they get to the point in transition that they're going to need it in. And so that's where, when I want to talk about arsenal optimization, I don't have moments much anymore where I get in the middle of a tournament and think, gosh, I really wish I had this ball, it's at home. That doesn't happen very often. What happens more for me is I'm just physically incapable of doing something that I need to do. The ball's reacting fine. I'm just not capable of doing said thing that I need to be doing. Now, that could be eased at the same time with a ball that's more appropriate for the situation. But I think in general, it goes all back to experience. Once you bowl so many tournaments, and especially if you're keeping track of something with PinPal or the app that Riley's got, you're going to see, okay, well, I tend to use this ball quite a bit, and I tend to use this ball in later games in the block, even on several different patterns. I usually get to this ball about game 4 or 5 on several different things, so that's an interesting note. And sometimes when you have really bad days and you just start throwing everything at the wall and seeing what's going to stick, that's how I found out that my Halo Burn was my late block killer, so to speak, in Kansas City more specifically, but anywhere where there's higher friction. I remember that one tournament I'd gone to at Summit, I can't remember, I think it was a 44-foot, 26, 27 mil pattern at Summit, and so I'd taken, physics, This was year and a half ago, so I think the physics had just came out. But I've got physics, phase 2. I've got strong stuff and whatever. I think I had a halo, and everything was just looking awful. I mean, it just looked terrible. Mark Henniger didn't bowl the tournament. He was out. I think he was working, and he just came to watch for a little bit because I was crossing with Mitch Hoope and Packy Hanrahan and Kevin Williams, and I think I shot 190 the first couple games, and Packy was plus 100 after 2, and it was 6 games, and so I'm like, okay, well, this is going to go terrible. I'm not making any money today. And Henniger was watching me. He's like, dude, he's like, you can't throw that stuff here. He's like, I don't care what the pattern says. I mean, these lanes are just dirty. What's the weakest or lowest friction cover that you got? And I'm like, well, I mean, I brought a high road. I didn't really expect to use it. And he's like, get it out, dude. Just don't even. And I'm like, okay, so we're 2 games in, and it's still 44 feet, 27, 28 mils, and I'm going, I mean, I'm bowling. I'm not making any money today, so let's just go ahead and go with it. And then I ended up averaging 240, 245 the rest of the day, and I actually cashed fairly solidly. I think they were paying 15 spots that day, and I finished in like 7th or 8th after really having no look and having no clue and whatever else, and just his simple point of experience with the house and with the lane surface and doing something that didn't really make a lot of sense. Sometimes that's where you really find specific balls for specific zones or circumstances like that. And so after bowling several of the KC tournaments and being able to travel around to stuff like Greater Ozarks, Tulsa, whatever else, bowling on different conditions and different lane beds and whatever else, I find myself taking the majority of the same equipment to the same places, but really paying attention to what works from what zone on the lane, what works in what kind of general point in the block. And so I really find myself with a couple of options for early in the block, a couple of options for the middle of the block, and a couple when I get deeper on the lane later in anything, and those stay fairly constant. And so I have a definite bag of 3 that goes anywhere I go. Now, if I'm going to Kansas City or Tulsa, the phase 3 stays home. Even if I think, okay, well, generally speaking, that ball might actually line up or work on the condition, but it hates high friction. It just burns up and pukes for days, and so that's definitely never going to Kansas City again. It's definitely never going to Tulsa again. Whereas something like the Idle Pearl works remarkably well in Tulsa, even though they're similar type balls, and those are the kind of higher level things to pay attention to. But that's kind of how I go through that. If I know that stuff's going to be drier, I'll take a few less aggressive balls, and if I know that I'm going to need a little bit more hook, then I'll take some stronger stuff. But generally, the core 4 stay the same, and I just adjust a little bit on the high end or adjust a little bit on the low end. So most of the time, I don't find myself saying, "Gosh, I wish I really had this ball." It's more or less, "Gosh, I really wish I could do, this or that with my mechanics."
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think for myself, kind of similar to what both of you guys have talked about, is kind of having those more distinct roles that I'm filling in a bag before I even filling my core 6 even before I add anything else.
Yeah.
Making sure that I fill those slots properly. That very similar. Actually, I did a guest video Zoom call with Tammer they put on his channel, kind of talking through my bag and how I structure it. And staying within that same overall paradigm really does help to kind of make sure I at least have my bases covered. Mm-hmm. And so I might get to. I think I made the comment to you that during the late in the 149 game is like, if I had the Hustle Inc., I think that would have been a little bit better on this pair. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the way is pragmatic the right word? I'm not sure if it is. But it's essentially like, what could have happened doesn't matter right now.
Yeah.
All that matters is what is happening and what I can do about it in the moment. Mm-hmm. And unless I know the guy who runs the shop and I can say, drill me a ball in 5 minutes, there's not really anything I can do about it in the middle of a game or in the middle of a block. And so essentially, It's kind of like trying to set yourself up to have your bases covered, and then trust your practice and your physical game to be able to bridge that. Trust your eyes, and try and figure out the moves from there.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you go back to your decision making to begin with, and you're looking at 30 mils, 43 feet, the ball choice, the decision you probably would have made is leave the UFO home and bring the ink. But looking at it again, like, how could you realistically leave your only sanded solid ASIM at home for a Hustle Ink when you're going out to 30 mils and 43 feet? So
yeah, exactly.
I mean, you can look at it in the middle of the block like you're saying, but you still had. I think that the point that you were making is that even though the ink probably would have been a better option for that game 6, there were still decisions with what you had available to you at the time that, had you been able to have a little foresight, probably still would have been just fine.
Yeah, and that's, I think I mentioned this as well later in that game 6 on the house shot tournament, was, if I had just gone to my Reckham and jumped another 10 left, I probably would have done okay. Like, I wouldn't have, I don't think 240 was out there on that pair for me.
No,
I think 220 was probably feasible if I got left enough fast enough, and I didn't. And part of that, admittedly, I think also was, this was my first weekend using the Daredevil in a competitive setting.
Yeah.
And I was still kind of learning that ball a little bit, and watching back some of the videos that got posted to Discord. It was actually hooking a lot sooner than I thought it was throughout the day on Sunday. And so I think I've taken that back home and learned from that. But I think if I had seen that more clearly in the moment, my moves would have been different.
Yeah.
And so that, and then kind of from the postmortem perspective is, thinking about what we've got coming with Summit and Lunar for KC Open in September, is knowing that both of those places, are pretty dirty lanes, a lot of friction, pretty dirty lane surfaces. Screw it. I'm not bringing ASIM. I legitimately might bring 5 symmetrics in a spare ball for KC Open.
Literally do not need ASIM, trust me.
The only ASIM I might bring is like an Astro.
Oh yeah, it'd be like an Astro. And
that's it.
And this is where you kind of go sideways.
Or maybe a Crystal Physics if I drill that.
Yeah.
The Crystal might come.
Yeah.
But like the point is, like, knowing that knowing the general feel of KC centers, Bolden, both the centers in Topeka, Westridge, and Gage, Bolden event at Olathe, and into Ward Parkway. The theme in all of those has been holy friction, Batman.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I literally do not need the big cover, big core balls. Like, the thought crossed my mind of even not taking an Axiom with me.
Yeah.
For KC Open.
I think you can get away with it.
I still will.
Yeah.
Just because I think I'd be stupid to not take something, like, to not have that safety net. But I don't think I need that plus the big sanded ASIM.
Yeah.
So, like, something like an Omega Crux of Physics and UFO, something like that, won't even make the cut in September. That's dropping that will give me the flexibility to put the ink in, which will give me a really good kind of offset shape to the more heavy rolling hard arc type of reaction that I get out of the Daredevil and the Reckham. So essentially, I have a kind of a side of my bag that's a little more responsive and continuous with the Axiom or a Phase 2, and then the Daredevil and the Reckham, or whatever else might come out in the interim. But that same kind of concept of a more responsive side of my bag, and then a couple of really control oriented balls with an IQ Tour Solid and a Hustle Ink or something like that.
Yeah.
So those in a spare ball, and unless something really zany happens, there'll be enough friction that stuff will work great. And then it's just a matter of, like we've all been saying, is make your, build out a bag that'll cover the situations and cover, what you think you're going to see within reason, and make sure you have a good variety in place and not like 4 big sanded ASIMs and you're bowling on volume. And then just know your gear, walk in, trust the process, trust your eyes, and figure it out from there.
And I think that this will actually segue pretty nicely into talking about equipment optimization, which is you have a bunch of different core strengths, you have a bunch of different cover strengths, friction responses, zones on the lane from where those balls are best from. Because again, like I said, you can have two balls that are kind of a sideways moving into each other, but one will play quite a bit better from straight for you, and one will play quite a bit better from deep for you. And so if you don't pay attention, you could end up with a lot more overlap than you technically have on paper, because you might take 6 balls with you that all play good from angle, and then you need to end up playing straight with them, and you're like, well, this ball is technically this strength and it should work. Why is it not working? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into equipment optimization, so I think it's a pretty deep rabbit hole that we can have a lot of fun with, aside from just talking about, this ball's a ball up from this ball and this ball's a ball down. What layout do we go with? I think that there's a lot more that goes into it as it pertains to shape and zones that you play on the lane. People say that you can't practice carry, and I used to think that you can't practice carry. I think that's an absolute load of crap.
Has anybody ever seen Brent Bauer's bowl?
Yeah.
He carries some ridiculous stuff.
Yeah, but he's kind of got that voodoo roll, and that's what I think makes the difference a lot of the time between the good field bowlers, are the ones that know how to get the pins down, and the ones that play the numbers game and try to think, well, this should work on this, and it's this volume and this ratio and this whatever else, and they try to add all the math together, and then they keep getting tapped, and they're like, well, I just couldn't carry today. It's like, well, no, you just didn't pay attention to, you thought you were hitting the pocket and you should carry. You didn't pay attention to how you were hitting the pocket. But anyway, I've got a couple things on my end I want to cover before we get out of here, but do you have any final thoughts as far as tournaments that weekend? Anything that's just kind of lingering on your mind, a point that you'd like to get out that we haven't already talked about?
I don't think I've got anything else.
I need to work on throwing it farther, apparently.
Yeah.
I need to make sure I can have a consistent slide, or at least get better with tacky approaches, because that was a big part of my struggles at Ward.
It was warm in there, and especially the further left we got when shooting at a couple of spares, I stuck on one and slid on the next one, and yeah, the approaches were kind of rough. Let's see. I had something I wanted to say, and I just forgot. But anyway, hopefully, if you guys are both able to, I don't know what next week. Oh, we'll actually be in McPherson for the doubles tournament if I don't blow out my arm again.
The next Sunday.
Yeah. So that's the thing that I need to get better at is just doing the full-on Shea Bittenbender. I always feel like when I get in, and this is something that I think that I spent a bunch of time bitching on Discord today and whining and crying about stuff, but I'm stupid, so I kind of semi-hurt myself today trying to stay a little bit more behind the ball, but I failed to consider that I practice the same way that I bowl in the videos, which is actually changing, which is a point that I need to make. I always start as far right as I can, and that's never, I just don't play right. And I think, well, when the lanes are fresh, when I have the chance to do it, I'd better practice on it so I can get a little bit more diverse and a little bit better. But the shot's rarely there. The equipment that I have to use to kind of force it to work doesn't really work, and so it just gets my mechanics out of whack trying to force something to work. And Shea Bittenbender always plays 4th or 5th arrow. I mean, I have never seen that guy. I mean, he might be a little bit right as far as like 3rd arrow, but even on the tournament on Saturday, I don't think he even went out there. He didn't even try. He just is so good at doing what he does that's what he played. Norm Duke and Liz Johnson are so good at playing straight that unless there's absolutely no possible way to be in there, and if you're ever playing right of Norm Duke or Liz Johnson, you're just an idiot and should quit now. But I throw the ball. And I think Riley, you said kind of the same thing. You don't have a whole lot of ball speed. I don't have a whole lot of ball speed, and I always notice that when I'm practicing, it's like, well, yeah, I can. When I get into fourth and fifth arrow, yeah, I can just strike at will there. Everything's comfortable. I don't hurt myself doing it, and so we're going to go back out and practice tomorrow, and I'm just going to start in deep to at least warm myself up. Instead of working right to left, maybe I should work left to right and, kind of build some comfort and then maybe see where I get myself instead of starting off trying to force something and throw full tilt and whatever else, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So speaking of that, the ball reviews are going to change here. Somebody asked earlier if we were going to talk about the new releases. I am not going. I think I'm actually going to get an Electrify Pearl. I think that's one that's kind of stood out to me. The hybrid is kind of, I don't think I'll use it, and I don't use low-end stuff very often, but when we get into a situation like the Kansas City tournaments, the one thing is that it's kind of hit or miss to when I'm actually able to use the high road tee, because it needs a lot of friction. It needs consistent friction. But the RG is so high too that when you get into those steep of angles, even though there's a lot of friction, it's really tough to kind of get it down the lane, but then get it to tip and go through the pins the right way when the core doesn't really rev. And so having something with a much lower friction core on it like Reactor Pearl is, but also having the numbers, what is it, 250, it was 251,
251.030, I think.
Yeah, so 251.030, so that's basically an IQ Tour core with a much lower friction cover. So sometimes you need higher RG to help you get down the lane, and you need bigger differential to help it get back, but sometimes you need that lower RG core to stabilize and kind of get the ball moving early, and then the lower differential to keep it from overreacting down lane. And
it's actually a slightly lower RG than the Hustle course.
Yeah,
actually.
Which is 253.
Yep.
So I think I'm going to get the Electrify Pearl. The Hustle PBR, I think, is the one. That's the solid one?
Yeah.
Because the Wrap is the Pearl one.
Yeah, Wrap is the Pearl. PBR is, the Wrap is polished Pearl, and the PBR is 3000 grit solid.
Yeah. And
I've got the PBR and Electrify Hybrid on the way.
Yeah.
Myself.
I've heard some good things about the PBR already, and even though I don't use lower end stuff, when we get to Kansas City, obviously it could be pretty helpful.
Yeah, who knows?
And especially most of the tournaments I bowl are you normally need to get into low end stuff pretty quick. So
yeah, the what I've seen from the Electrify is it definitely looks very ink like in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
Whereas it's a little more controlled down lane. So my plan with the Electrify Hybrid is I might actually go like a weaker pin down type of layout on that to give me a ball that will get through the fronts, but then be really, really, really smooth once it sees friction.
Kennan actually recoed his Pearl.
His Electrify Pearl. Yeah, I saw that. That's kind of what got the wheels turning for me. Was seeing how that ball reacts for him. So something that's kind of a very limited use ball, but something kind of a trick ball almost, where I can, even with my rev rate, I'd be able to just play really straight and just kind of ride the friction into the pocket. Kind of almost similar to what I might do with a pitch purple, for example, just a little different going through the pins.
Hi, Mistel. Did you go,
So
Mistel?
when I was
Yes, I know. Hi.
when I was headed down to Austin's
doggy.
shop to get my Ghost, he had up on his shelf that he was drilling a whole bunch of new stuff, and he had the Electrify Hybrid up, and he was ready to drill that one. And he had said he heard another one of the staffers say something about it reminding them of a fast, so he was kind of excited about that one.
Yeah. Riley, I don't really keep up that much with the Motive product line, admittedly. So what's new for y'all? What have you drilled recently besides the Ghost, obviously, and what have
The
you really been
Ghost,
enjoying?
I've been throwing a ton. I mean, I threw it Thursday. First game out of the box with it was $2.99, so that was nice.
Quality.
Stink a 10 pin.
Throw it better.
Monday, I'm getting the new tank, the desert tank. So we'll see how that one rolls.
Okay.
That one's a Pearl version of the friction microcell polymer. So and it's got the core from the Thrills, so it's like a super low diff core in it. It's a 257-015. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay,
Oh,
so that's kind of
that's
like
interesting.
That's like a tropical surge almost.
Yeah. And what's crazy about the tanks is that they're all so different because the Covert tank has
Yeah.
the Torx core that was originally in the Forza when the Forzas first came out, and it's got a fairly clean. It's the first friction microcell polymer cover that they came out with, and then the Blitz cover is just so much stronger than that one, and it's just got the gear core. It's got the core from the shock, and it's able to just loop the lane so much easier, and it just handles so much more volume. So I'm curious to see how this desert tank is going to react with such a low diff core and a sanded pearl friction microcell cover.
Yeah, that I hadn't really looked at the specs for that. That looks actually really interesting to see that kind of lopey, low diff core inside of a sanded polyurethane. So that could. I remember. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I'm excited for it.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing a few guys throwing that ball at the Tournament of Champions back in February. I was up there watching, and it was actually it went through the prints pretty dang well, and it was not a shape I had seen from other urethane-esque balls.
And one that I'm not looking at getting, not to just talk smack on stuff that I may or may not ever like, I'm not interested in the Ripcord Flight in the slightest. That ball it does not look like it would roll well for me, so I'm just not even going to touch that one.
Yeah,
But
that's fair. One other idea that I just saw from Discord a minute ago is essentially kind of a back and forth between Luke and myself, and you, Riley, is try and kind of match some balls back and forth in terms of what they actually do on lane. So, like from the various brands. So, like one example is, we have our physics. What would you kind of say is a good corollary for that for you guys?
Jackal Ghost for sure.
Okay. That was kind of what I
100%.
suspected. Yeah.
And I was watching Luke's videos again today, and he was comparing the Crux Prime, Gravity Evolve, and Physics, and immediately Crux Prime is Trident Abyss, Gravity Evolve is Alpha Jackal, and Physics is Jackal Ghost.
The Evolve is that's interesting. I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah,
I'm
because
gonna have to go back and rewatch that video now.
that's what I would compare them to.
Okay.
Because while the cover on the Alpha is the same as the Abyss, the core in it is the same as the Ghost. So it something about it gives you a little bit more shape, but not nearly as much as the Ghost has. Because the cover on the Ghost is
earlier
so-
cover.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess let's kind of go the other way then. For Luke and for me, Luke, what do you think? Let's say someone has a Venom Shock, but they want to get a Storm equivalent to that. What do you think?
That one's a tricky one because
I have an answer. I don't think it's what you think it is.
Yeah, it's 255, like 035 or something. Is
What, the Shock?
The Shock.
No, it's 248, 034.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay. I was right on the differential. I don't know
Yeah.
what I was thinking with the.
Nothing apparently.
Yeah, nothing.
I'm kidding.
That one's actually kind of a tricky one. I see a lot of the Phase 2 in it, even though the Phase 2's technically
I was
stronger.
going to say the same.
Yeah.
I'm looking more at shapes and general overall how they play on the lane. The Phase 2 something you can play straight with. It's something you can get deep with. It kind of handles friction the same. It handles oil the same. And I think the Venom Shock is a lot stronger than it really should be.
The cover on it is way stronger than a light to medium, as they put it in their ball guide.
Yeah, I've never understood why it's right there in their ball guide.
Yeah.
And that's really funny because I think the line, the Venom line, or whatever that is basically Roto's HP2 line, where it's supposed to be.
That's HP5, Luke, not
it's
HP2.
supposed to be a light to medium oil slot, and I'm covering more boards. I mean, my MVP's out hooking my Astro.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was gonna say the same thing though. Is that Motive has some sort of they've got some sort of voodoo wizardry and bullshit thing they pull with their solid covers that makes them react unlike pretty much anything else on the market. And even though it is a gap, it's probably like a 15, 16 point gap on differential between the shock and the phase 2. They do they do a lot of things very, very similarly.
And that's really interesting because you wouldn't look at the number. You could see the lower RG out of it. But if I just guessed, I mean, I'm thinking 045 to 050 on the differential, just watching what the shock does on the lane.
Yeah, same.
And talking about how they have some strange voodoo with their solid covers, 3 balls that were in totally different categories for them had the exact same cover. The Venom Recoil had the, Coercion MFS solid. Yeah, the Venom Recoil had Coercion Coercion MFS. The T10, which was a high diff, high RG 10-year anniversary limited edition ball, had the same cover, which they put as their ultimate benchmark and definitely should not have been a limited edition ball because that ball is way too good to have just a limited release of. And then the Villain that was recently discontinued with the asymmetric high RG, high diff, high intermediate diff core also had the same cover, and they're 3 totally different reactions.
Yeah, that's a good illustration too of how the cover kind of dictates, cover and surface tends to kind of dictate when the ball hooks, and then the core and the layout kind of more so control what the ball does once it hooks. So then I'd be willing to wager if you were to take a Villain, a T10, and a Recoil, throw them all back to back, same layout. Bet that I haven't thrown them, so I don't know, but I'd be willing to speculate that they would probably hook in about the same spot, but it'd just be a very different feel once they pick up.
Right.
So does that kind of match with what you've seen, Riley?
Yeah, for me, the Recoil is, I think Brett Spangler has said it, and then I know AJ Johnson has shown it with him recently switching over to Motive. The Venom Recoil is a fantastic short pattern ball. That thing just is so slow and so controllable. And then like the T10 has the perfect amount of back end combined with the perfect amount of smoothness in the cover. And then the Villain, if you left it sanded at 3,000 that it came out of box, it was great, really controllable, really round. But they actually recommend that you let it lane shine up, and it tends to have more back end similar to like the T10 started with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Let's go one more from Storm to Motive. Riley, let's say I have an IQ Tour Solid that I've run with, not a ton of surface on it. If I want to get a Motive ball, what would you say is kind of an equivalent to that? Obviously, the shock is on paper,
right?
But we all know how that would end.
IQ Tour Solid. I would almost lean, shockingly, towards and this is me personally, not for everybody. I would almost lean towards a covert tank.
Okay, interesting.
Because it doesn't just immediately turn left, and you can still get it to turn the corner a little bit. You just really have to make sure your speed is right. Let me check some of the retired ones.
Just kind of slow and round, kind of is your overall concept there. Yeah.
I would actually.
What about the other idea I was thinking was maybe a Venom Recoil with that little weaker cover? I know it's ASIM.
Right. It's close. I think the recoil just stands up a little too quick in comparison, probably because of that asymmetric core.
Yeah.
What about that?
So sorry, go ahead, Luke.
What about that black ball that's sitting back on your bed there, Riley?
The black one, the Jackal Ghost?
Oh no, I thought that was a covert revolt. So
no,
negative.
No, that one's in the other room, sitting like in a glass case, protected from all the elements.
I can read it now. That says Jackal. But no, I always kind of thought that the I'm a big revolt fan anyway, because I threw Motive before I went to Storm, and my bag was covert revolt, Sigma Tour, and tribal. And so the covert revolt was a stronger, more continuous, definitely, but still kind of very IQ Tour shaping. I mean, it was asymmetric. It had more, junk in the trunk, so to speak. It was firmer, a little bit more consistent at the break point, but the on-lane shape I thought was pretty similar. And then the tribal was basically a little bit weaker IQ emerald. So, I mean, there was several tournaments I went to with just those 3 in the bag because I just didn't need anything else. But that would be one of my initial thoughts, just from a shape perspective.
Maybe a sanded Hydra could fit that spot better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The Hydra's got a very similar core shape and overall similar specs.
What are the core numbers on that?
I think it's
37
diff, but a higher RG at 255. So.
Okay, yeah, I could see that working. All right, Riley, you pick one from your line, and Luke and I'll try and match it. Let's go active only.
I was gonna say I could be really mean and say Tank Blitz because there's no company that has something that's like that.
Yeah.
But I'll say Forge Fire because that's a little bit different.
Yeah, that is kind of different.
I have my answer. Do you have yours, Luke?
I got to think on it for a second. You go ahead.
I've got. See, my initial thought of a current ball that would match it would be Phase 3.
Yeah.
But if I were to pick a retired Storm ball that reminded me a lot of the Fire, I would say the Supersonic.
The Supersonic?
Yeah.
Well,
is the cover that strong on the Forge Fire? You're talking about this. You're talking about the one that's like looks like mustard and ketchup had an accident in the condiment table, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That one looks quite a bit chuggier to me than the Phase 3. The Phase 3 I think is longer and cleaner.
Yeah.
I mean the hook potentials don't really match, but I see more MVP Pearl on the Forge Fire, just obviously, on steroids across the board.
That would make sense.
But that's kind of what
definitely
I see.
Several feet earlier, but I could kind of see that actually.
Yeah, it's more of an overall shape thing. So yeah, if we're going apples to apples, that's what makes it trickier. It's kind of in that I see more Daredevil type stuff if we're getting closer to that.
Now I got to look at our product line. Look at our catalog.
Yoda in the comments of the live stream, I totally had forgotten about it, but yeah, the ProMotion and the Blitz are very similar because they both have super early, super smooth covers.
Yeah.
But they just go about it in different ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I wasn't even really thinking about that because Spec is the closest cover out there to Microcell.
I would agree. Yeah, 100%. At least the Microcell Plus that's on the Blitz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this is actually a tough one.
Yeah, it's really tough to get something that's apples to apples. We can get some of that shape's fairly close. I mean, but it's not quite a Phase 2 Venom Shock to where there's the Phase 2 is a little bit stronger, maybe a little bit earlier, but they're close enough that if you can't make it work, then that says more about you than the comparison. But yeah, Forge Fire is kind of a tough one. I'm gonna
almost feel it. Original Sonic, maybe. I mean, I know it's discontinued.
Yeah, I think.
But that was enough cover and enough core, but also chuggy.
Yeah, it's got that same type of look on the lane, and I think that would definitely be the. Got a question here. I know you guys are Team Storm, but who do you see shaking up the industry? Do you think Brunswick's acquisition of EBI will help both groups of brands or hurt them? I think it'll hurt them a little bit, partially because of the whole Mexico thing. People aren't happy with Brunswick being in Mexico to begin with. They're not happy about the way that the acquisition went down. They're not happy about Ebonite balls now feeling more Brunswicky than they used to, and I think with so many different brands releasing so many different balls, I think a lot of them are kind of going to be lost in the shuffle, and you're going to have a lot of staffers that have 7 brands worth of stuff to choose from, and so there's not going to be a whole lot of consistency probably in what they're throwing from tournament to tournament, and then even then it's hard enough to keep up with 2 brands worth of balls, let alone 7. And I don't really see anybody shaking up the industry, but I think when I was throwing Motive in 2013, 2014, I think they were making the best stuff in the industry. I don't really, obviously I'm going to be biased, but I like our product line. Storm used to be the long and strong, but now we've got so many different looks within both product lines that I think that our product lines are probably among the most solid out there right now, even when comparing to several different brands. But I do if I wasn't with Storm, I would probably go the direction of Motive, just because they had a little bit of a little bit of a lull. They started making some stuff that wasn't really, I didn't think, that great, but now they're kind of getting back on their game here, especially in the last year, releasing some really diverse stuff, really strong stuff, really, and the, have you seen that new Trident? That kind of smoke and red one?
Is that one of the overseas
I think
ones?
it's one of the overseas ones, but Motive stuff specifically, the shelf appeal has all of a sudden just gone off the charts here the last several releases.
Yeah, their overseas stuff is so tempting, and I'm always so close to spending way too much money on a ball I don't
Yeah.
need.
Let me see. I
Like-
gotta. I saw.
Like all the overseas revolts look incredible. And that's got to be my favorite core of all time, that Vanquish core.
That Royal Revolt you have looks sick.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
why I've got
that
it
one
sitting
looks
on the
good.
shelf in the background.
Yeah.
I gotta find this.
And one other thing, Fluffy Guy had asked, what are your overall thoughts of smaller brands like 900 Global or Motive?
Yeah. There we go.
I think we pretty much covered it with Motive. They seem to be putting out some stuff that looks really, really good recently.
Yeah.
I do think, like, there was a time, probably 18 months to 2 years ago, where I'm not sure, oh, that looks nice.
Yeah. The Trident Tempest. I mean, that looks
That looks really nice. I do think there was a time a couple of years ago where I would have been legitimately worried about having too much of a one-dimensional bag shape-wise, drilling from Motive. But I mean, looking at some of their newer stuff, like they've got 3 or 4 really good shiny balls that can cover a lot of ground, and combine that with their solid covers are incredible. I think they've come a long way. Global is a very interesting case because they're actually owned by the Chrismans, who own Storm and Roto as well.
And now they're getting made in Utah.
Yeah. So they're actually the Global factory that was in San Antonio has now closed for good, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Is that right, Luke?
That's as far as I know. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the Global factory is closed, and Global stuff is going to be poured in the Utah plant now, and they added another production line to accommodate that. So Global has kind of had their own separate R&D and marketing groups, but I would not be surprised to see some of that kind of merge together in the next few years. For them to kind of synergize with Storm and Roto a little more and kind of leverage some shared R&D, and I think that's just going to level up Global, if anything.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty rough time right now to be a single brand, and I think that Motive has done a great job of kind of weathering the storm of the big companies, especially now that we have the big conglomerate of brands and stuff. I don't see, and 900 Global recently has kind of been, they either have a big hit or it's a big miss. They don't have a whole lot of in between. It's kind of like, that ball's okay. It's either this ball is amazing or this just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Have you seen their new pink badger that they're coming out with?
Yeah, I saw
thing
Rash
looks-
using that at the was it Strike Derby a couple weeks ago.
That thing looks incredible.
Yeah. And
And
we've
it's
got
a polished solid.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah, it's a polished solid.
solid?
Interesting.
Uh-huh.
Interesting.
I was watching Lavery Spar throw it in that Oklahoma tournament that I was talking about.
Okay. I haven't seen much of Global balls. Do you think they shape close to Storm or totally different shapes? I think they're familiar.
Familiar but different.
Yeah.
I see Global as a little more forward off the spot than either Storm or Roto, if I was to prescribe a default reaction, so to speak, for the company. Similar in response time overall, though.
Yeah.
At least that's kind of how I see it. I don't know, Riley or Luke, if you have different opinions on that.
Yeah. No, it's
Say
kinda in
900
between.
I haven't followed much.
Yeah, I don't follow them either too much, but I would kind of expect that they would, now that they're in the same plan as Storm, so I would expect the companies to merge at some point. I don't think that, I think that it was a convenient situation with the virus and whatever to go on ahead and, condense their production. I know that they were making a bunch of stuff. They were making the hustles down there, and they were making some other things to kind of fill up the space. But I think it makes more sense to do everything in Utah. Especially Mr. Bill had a point earlier to where the elevation in San Antonio is like 600 feet above sea level, and Utah is 4,400 feet above sea level. So that's going to have an effect on some curing and some other things from a chemical standpoint. But I would expect them to merge at some point, but I think that they'll wait until it looks like they're not necessarily scared of the Brunswick EBI empire now. I think if they would have just kind of if they would have merged, if 900 Global would have merged with Storm and Roto, it might have looked like a kind of a panic knee-jerk reaction to what Brunswick and what happened with Brunswick and Ebonite, which I wouldn't have thought it would be the case if they did that. But it's just, appearances are going to be appearances. But I would expect that here before too long we'll probably be allowed to throw 900 Global as well. They'll kind of merge, and I think it'd be good for both brands really, and allowing somebody like Sean Rash, Daria Payuk to get access to the storm stuff too. So I don't.
When you were talking about sorry to interrupt you.
No.
About the Brunswick and EBI move over, and you talked about how the EBI stuff seems a lot more Brunswick. When Bill O'Neill first brought out the Redemption Solid on the TV show, was it the Players against Tackett, I think?
Yeah, he used the whole show of the Players when he ran up. Yeah.
That pour for that ball is distinctly Brunswick for both the Redemption Solid and Pearl. Those are both distinctly Brunswick like design. I don't know what it is, but you can just tell that
it's the way their nozzles pour the resin in and how it swirls the colors together.
Gotcha.
Well, it looks when the first time I saw Redemption Solid, I thought it was what was it? Not the Kingpin Rule, the third one they came out with, the one that was like orange and white
and yellow, or orange and white and black.
Yeah.
Quickly tackle a question. I do have a point about that. On top of that, why do you think Daria is allowed to throw a Storm spare ball, specifically because 900 Global does not have a spare ball of any kind? So,
well, they didn't at the time. I think they have a clear poly that they're making right now, similar to what Storm there to have.
Okay.
I can double check, but I'm pretty sure on that.
Yeah, they've got one on their site.
Okay.
Yeah, probably the clear one that Barnes uses a lot.
So yeah, she'll probably switch to that now that they actually have a spare ball option. The other point that I was going to make about the Brunswick stuff is the Ebonite pours for all the companies. I've always thought that their colors are borderline depressing. They're always kind of dark and drab and lifeless and whatever else. And I've had people ask about whatever, and it's like I'm kind of a big marketing guy because it does matter a lot if somebody's not interested in the ball. It takes something like the Wild Streak. It doesn't have a whole lot of shelf appeal. I think it's a great ball that's underappreciated, but it doesn't really stand out on the shelf. And so that's a big part of what goes into it. And people had asked me, would you ever go to Ebonite before? And I'm like, well, yeah, I love the Taboos. They're still making Black Widows, which have the same core, and they have some good stuff. But it's like I couldn't get behind that marketing. I would have a really tough time doing that, even if the equipment was great. And over here, I mean, Storm's got all the bright colors. They've got scents. They've got great reactions to back it up. And so I mean, I'll be here as long as they'll have me. But I think that the Ebonite stuff is going to be better for the Brunswick acquisition, because I think, number one, Brunswick covers hold up a whole lot better than Ebonite covers did. And now they're going to look a lot better. So I think that there's still a lot of stuff that's going to get lost in the shuffle, but I think it's a net positive for the Ebonite brands anyway. But on the other side of that, now you have 7 brands of kind of Brunswick-y acting stuff. So I think Radical is the one brand that stands out that looks different than the Brunswick stuff. I think Radical almost looks a little bit more motive-y. Everything's kind of smooth and continuous.
Yeah.
Radical's more of a one-trick pony, but it's a really good trick. So, let's see. Anyhow, what I was going to have a couple things to say before we sign off here. We're getting close to the... Actually, we're at 2.5 hours. We've sat here and rambled for 2.5 hours.
Holy
That's what you were trying to avoid.
Yeah, I know.
It's been a good ramble this time, though. It's
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
Like,
Well,
I feel like we've gotten
it-
a lot done.
Yeah, and it really helps, and it kind of segues into what we talk about next. And I do want to start. I'm gonna try to build myself up to get a couple pros on here to get their perspective from tournaments, and I'm going to try to limit it to like 30 minutes. I'm going to try to be respectful of their time and say, hey, we're just going to do this for 30 minutes, and we're actually going to stick to 30 minutes instead of we're going to talk for 30 minutes, and then an hour and a half later.
Luke, as we like to say here in the South, bless your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, as far as the videos go, there are some videos coming eventually sometime when we start doing production again. But when I do start making videos again, I'm not going to do the arrow progression anymore. I thought it was a good idea to kind of illustrate what's going to happen from here to here to here, but all it ended up doing is I'm going back and looking at videos, is everything kind of looks the same. And if you don't have a very critical eye for ball reaction, you're going to see, okay, threw that ball from second arrow, it struck, third arrow, it struck, fourth arrow, it struck. And it's very hard to see the changes that I'm making to get the balls to strike from those various arrows. How I'm going to throw the high road pearl, for example, from fourth arrow to get it to strike versus throwing the nuclear or the UFO from fourth arrow are two different things. But what an untrained eye will see is, okay, well, you threw it from fourth arrow and they all struck. So I am going to go back to just throwing them wherever the most comfortable part of the lane is for me to throw them at. And that will hopefully give a bit better illustration of the differences between the bowling balls. Now, there's still a whole bunch of stuff that we'll talk about in arsenal optimization whenever we get around to that. But that's a change I'm going to make for that. Also, I am no longer on Facebook. I kind of lurk and look at stuff, but I don't post anymore. I have actually kind of moved more to Instagram. I'm not really a picture-y person. But I've been trying to work on that, and Instagram seems a lot more happy and positive. And you know, when you friend somebody on Facebook, you either have to manually go in and unfollow them if you're not interested in seeing what they post, or just leave it and have your feed clogged up with 4,000 different people. So I check in with Facebook from time to time to see if there's anything there, but I'm not going to be using that much more as a platform at all. I think Instagram's a whole lot more popular anyway. It's easier to use and more fun to use. And I do post some stuff on Twitter here from time to time, but I'm going to be going more the Instagram direction. So anybody that wants to follow me on Instagram, it's just my name, all lowercase. It's easy to find. Same thing on Twitter. So that's kind of the news that I have for right now.
Yeah. Also, shameless plug for my channel.
Yeah,
I actually got back out and shot some video today.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm going to be working finally catching up on a few vastly overdue ball videos. So next couple weeks I'll have videos for the Omega Crux, comparing that to the physics, the nuclear cell with comparison to the Astro, and pitch purple versus pitch black. So I'll have full videos coming out for those soon, hopefully, when I can find time to actually edit the videos together.
So yeah,
and then videos for the Astro, for the Axiom and the UFO,
okay.
as well as some other stuff in the pipe.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I'm going to do a little bit of restructure on my videos too, and kind of change the way I describe things. I'm going to go more the what I've been talking about the optimization. I'm going to get more into what zones they play on the lane more for me, and try to simplify things a little bit and get a little bit more structure with them. Best looking ball of all time in your opinion, any brand? The Halo Burn is freaking sweet. No. Okay, Phase Tour.
That's actually a good point. The Burn is really good.
Yeah, the Burn's awesome, but I've got to go Phase Tour. I forgot that was up there, but yeah, and James, you saw it the other day, so yeah, I went there.
I'm slightly embarrassed to say this, but I'm going to go with the Timeless.
It is pretty
I hated how that ball rolled.
Yeah.
I could not strike with it to save my life. It would get to the last 15 feet, and then it felt like it was on a hooked up to a random number generator.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh, that thing looked good on the ball return. So if that's the measure of good ball reaction, that was the best ball ever. I think it was one of the best ever made.
If we're gonna go off of stuff that we have, I'm a big fan of my Royal. I love that thing.
Yeah, the Royal looks really good. I think the Intense Fire didn't get enough love, honestly.
Yep. That one was definitely sweet.
I really liked the look of the space-time continuum.
Oh yeah. That pink.
Which one is that? Is that the 900 Global
the
Halo
900
Pearl?
Yeah.
Okay,
Pretty
yeah.
much. I've always been a big fan of like that. If someone says like 80s, that's like the color scheme that I immediately think of, like that vaporwave type.
Well, the font they used for the logo.
Yeah, it was like the
Luke
back
showing
to the,
off his Halo.
it
Or
was
his
the Back to the
picture.
Future.
Oh my
font,
gosh,
wasn't it?
you're obsessed.
Yep. Dude, I will not shut up about this Halo burn, by the way. I keep telling James, even though I've told him 1,000 million times.
I'm getting a crystal physics. Leave me alone.
All about nano pearl covers. But,
Oh my gosh.
I mean, and I think that the big thing for the phase tour that really sets it off is the logo color too. I mean, this thing is just, I mean, everything pops on this. And everybody, even before the ball has holes in it, you always kind of, I kind of grab it where I'm going to put the holes, and then I spin it. It looks really, really freaking cool spinning. So
Or we all just run into our collections to show cool looking equipment.
oh yeah,
Pretty much. I'm going to rescind my comment of the timeless. So this
Code Black or something? Ooh,
no,
IQ
it's
Supreme?
better than that. This is the IQ Tour GT.
Oh. Okay.
This came out. I plugged and re-drilled it. Unfortunately, this came out about 2 or 3 years ago, and this was actually the first IQ Tour Pearl that I ever owned. And so I saw a really cool looking ball. These are actually basically the colors of my alma mater. I went to NC State University here in North Carolina for undergrad. And so I saw an IQ Tour Pearl in the colors of my alma mater, and I was like, I must have this ball. So it's a lot of fun to throw. I mean, it's an IQ, so not much more needs to be said on that front.
Riley, have you seen a super idol?
Yeah, I did.
cheater.
I watched that video of yours not too long ago too.
Must be
I have
nice.
I have an overseas Marvel XH that I got from a friend. That one is basically a hypercell skid with a bit more muted colors. It's got some blue in it too. I'll actually go grab it really quick. I'll run away from our. Be right back.
All right. Well, I guess yeah, Astro and Vapor Zone look really good. Brian, IQ Sapphire. I think that's the same color as the that limited edition PBA 60 ball they did a couple years ago, which I actually had one of those too, and it looked really nice.
I've got a TL30.
Shut up, Luke.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Bill.
This is the Marvel XH,
Oh, that looks really nice.
Oh, yeah.
and it's got some phasing in it. But
Whoa.
That makes it even cooler.
Yeah.
yeah, it's got like a bronze and a purple and a black, and the logos are blue.
Yeah,
so
that's
it
what I'm
looks
gonna say,
super
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, the logos really make that thing pop.
But yeah, and it's got blue Marvel green Bolt logo.
Oh wow.
Dude, that looks sick.
And then probably the one that everybody that knows old stuff is gonna hate me the most for is this
Oh,
one.
Quantum Helix. Wow.
Dude.
This thing is heavy. It's 16 pounds.
Yeah.
If you never had or never saw a Helix when they were released, it's got this tiny dot above my middle finger is the pin. It's like a square, clear pin.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But that's a fun one.
I had a teammate in youth leagues that had one of those in 1999.
I got one more cool one that I've got set up behind me.
All right.
Royal Revolt. Here we go.
Yeah. Nope, it's not the Royal.
Not the Royal.
The Royal's
No.
cool, but
Yeah.
This one is a special one. I got it from Corey Clausing not too long ago. It's actually your standard everyday Revolt Vengeance, which
Nice.
plus is an okay ball, but it's signed by Maria Rodriguez.
oh sweet.
That's awesome.
And it was a ball she was going to use on TV, I believe. So it's got her drilling that she had on it, and it's a signed one that
Dude,
I
that's
was
awesome.
able to snag from
Yeah, that's really cool.
him for not a whole lot.
Yeah.
That's sweite.
So I got to thank Corey for that one. But yeah, the Royal's a favorite, of course.
Yeah. Those like solid color balls that still have some pop to them visually look really, really nice. Like the Royal, I think the shot kind of falls in that category, both the solid and the pearl. Venom recoils kind of in that boat. Brighter pours of like an IQ2 or a Hustle Ink fit there.
I saw a
Emerald,
Hustle Ink.
Idol Pro.
I saw a Hustle Ink a while back when they were relatively new that had some really light blue, tiny swirls in it, and it just looks so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, while we're speaking of that, keep talking for a second.
Well,
So,
let's
and-
see. What?
Talking about other overseas balls that look cool, I was mentioning all the Revolts. The Gold Revolt is like a covert one, but it has gold logos, similar to the Royal. And then their Red Revolt, which is just a solid red covert revolt with black logos, and they have a Red Star Revolt, which is a Vengeance with a red star, and it's like red and gray. All of those look so good.
Yeah.
So this is the most unique ball that I have. This is a Hustle Ink.
Oh
That's
yeah.
that's an ink.
Oh yeah.
This is
You got that blem
This
off
is,
of.
this is that color blem ink that I got off of eBay earlier this
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
Does it
So
look like that
said-
in pictures?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I sanded it, but it's, yeah. I mean, it's got this like sick phasing all around the entire
Yeah.
ball, and it looks incredible visually. The downside is it rolls worse than the Timeless. Like I can't carry it. Doesn't want a corner. I don't, which is, and it's 4.5 pen to pap. I think that I drilled it with. It just doesn't roll well at all, but it looks fantastic visually.
I had a Color Blem Classic Zone, which was originally like a deep purple pearl, kind of like the Fuse purple pearl, way back in the day. But the blem was a really bright fluorescent purple, kind of a purplish pink that looked
nice.
really ridiculous. And that one was really good. But all right. So we've been on for a couple and a half hours, almost 3 hours now. So this is probably a good place to cut it off. And I don't know if we'll be able to stream from McPherson next weekend. Probably not. So we might have to skip next weekend. But
Weekend after that is 4th of July as well.
okay.
might
So
have to
yeah,
push back
that's
a little more.
So we might have to figure something out. But the next one I definitely want to talk about is equipment optimization. I think that a lot of what we talked about tonight will kind of segue into that nicely.
Yeah. Oh, Greg Atwater posted next live stream. We'll have to do the ugliest ball of all time. That's extremely easy. The DV8 Grudge Hybrid. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Trauma response.
Drive.
The El Nino.
The drive is basically a Grudge Hybrid visually,
Yeah.
so same difference.
The El Nino exit was brown and black. So that one was kind of rough too. But
Optimus Solid.
yeah.
Winner Solid didn't look
Optimus
great.
Solid
Winner
was
didn't look great either
awful across the board. So.
on both regards. Yeah.
All right. Well,
We could go on with that for days, I feel like.
all right. Thanks everybody for hanging out. We appreciate it. Thanks once again to James Kniffen, Shimwrecker Enterprises, and Riley Patton, who you guys are seeing for the first time, but he is Swift Cookies. If you've seen him in the chat.
Yep.
James
Only a couple times.
James just posted the link to my Patreon. I do have a Patreon, and I've started writing a really interesting book. If you want to find out some really crazy and interesting stuff about me, it's basically talking about how I'm a loser and been a loser my whole life, and I'm going to teach you how to win because I'm kind of like Thomas Edison. I know how to not do it. So but just going to kind of go through some of the stuff in my life and the choices I've made, and just kind of settling. So, and I do have the whitest story of all time. Which is the reason for the wing. I tell the story about the wing, but the reason I have the wing is because I dislocated my shoulder. I displaced it 8 inches on a layup because white guy can't jump, 6 foot, but definitely wasn't going for a dunk or anything. Dislocated my shoulder on a layup when nobody touched me. And that's got to be the whitest story that you've ever heard. And then I rushed my rehab, so that's why I have the wing. But anyway, yeah, Patreon stuff, Discord gets you into the chat server. We do have a free chat server. We do have a free section of the server if you're interested. Patreon's $5 a month if you're interested in that. I do have some kind of limited content on Patreon. That kind of sucks. It's more or less just a filter to get into the private channels on the Discord.
Which is where the real fun happens.
Yeah, and that's where that's where we post most of the stuff that would go on Patreon anyway. So there's stuff in there. It's just there's less on Patreon because it's basically a glorified Facebook feed. But we have a pretty good community in there. There's the money is less.
It's more of a troll filter than about the financials.
Yeah, it's a troll filter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow, thanks everybody for watching. We will see you next time, and next one will probably be a live stream. I don't think I'll have any videos before we do a next live stream, but yeah, I'm at a tournament next weekend, and then the following weekend is July 4th, so happy 4th of July if I don't see you before then. So we'll probably be back the weekend after that, which is the 11th. So probably be looking at that. But once again, thanks James, thanks Riley, and we will see you guys later.
Been fun.
See you later.